Toronto folk singer is dead after she was attacked by a pair of coyotes.
What is the monkey doing? Tell me what the monkey...
He hit your face off!
We actually have a trainer in the water with one of our whales.
If I show weakness, if I retreat, I may be hurt, I may be killed.
Baby Azaria Chamberlain was taken by a dingo back in 1980.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Man-Eaters, the only true crime podcast on the entire friggin' internet where all the killers are real animals. Whether it's biting, scratchings, maulings, or clawings, we are here to talk about it, and we have made it to the end of another year. Hooray! Very good. I'm so proud of all of us. We did it! If you're listening to this when this drops, guys, congratulations. You have all survived another year on this planet that is absolutely packed with animals that have, historically speaking, had no problem killing us and eating us. Over the past 12 months, we've talked about predators that stalk, ambush, crush, bite, poison, fuck, and in some cases, just patiently wait while humans make very bad decisions. From infamous attacks to forgotten incidents to animals that have become legends for all the wrong reasons, 2025 has been a very big year for this show. And so today, instead of a brand new story, we're doing something different, something we do at the end of every year, a massive, mammoth-sized best of 2025 episode. Woohoo! Another clap. I love this soundboard, don't you, African Drum Circle? Yeah, great. So, guys, today we're going to go through some of my favorite stories, a collection of my favorite moments from the past 12 months. To me, the wildest stories, the most absurd details, and sometimes little bits that made me stop mid-script and say, yeah, okay, that's definitely going to go in this. So whether you've been listening since episode 1 or you've only just joined us, this is a great opportunity to revisit the moments that have defined Man-Eaters for the past year. And maybe, just maybe, remind ourselves why respecting wildlife is usually a better idea than annoying it and testing it. All right, gang, hit the tape. Let's do it. Best of 25. Woo! Yeah, love it. Speaking of egos, we're talking about Las Vegas today. Las Vegas, Nevada. Viva Las Vegas. I've never been there before, but I've heard it's pretty syphilitic. No, I'm kidding. Apparently, it's a nice town. My fiance's friend's family lives in Las Vegas, and it's obviously not just about casinos and big bright lights and entertainment, but today's story pretty much is, today we're talking about the tragedy of Siegfried and Roy. Of course, one of the more famous performers to come out of the 90s and early 2000s. And it's a story I remember happening when I was a little kid. We're going to do a deep dive into that today. So please, sit back, relax, and let me regale you with the incredible story of Siegfried and Roy.
Another in the wild, wild world of show business. Make no mistake, the legendary Siegfried and Roy are not just a circus act. For all the Las Vegas glitz, their show is really about an unprecedented relationship with wild animals. They say there are no tranquilizers, no whips. All the cats have their teeth and claws, and at any moment, if it wanted, any cat could become a 600 to 700 pound killing machine.
Siegfried Fischbacher and Roy Horn were German-American magicians and entertainers who performed together as the legendary act Siegfried and Roy. They were best known for their use of white lions and white tigers in their acts. In 1967, they were invited to begin performing in Las Vegas, Nevada. Starting in 1990, they headlined a show at the Mirage Casino Resort. Their performing career came to an abrupt end in 2003 when Horn was critically injured by a tiger during the performance. Siegfried and Roy met in 1957 whilst working on a cruise ship called the T.S. Bremen. Siegfried Fischbacher was performing magic tricks as an entertainer, and Roy Horn was working as a steward. Roy, who had a deep fascination with animals, especially big cats, suggested that Siegfried incorporate a live cheetah as part of his act. Thankfully, Roy had actually smuggled a cheetah named Chico onto that ship. This bold idea sparked a legendary partnership, eventually leading them to become one of the most famous magic and entertainment performance duos in Las Vegas history. Siegfried Fischbacher was born on June 13, 1939, in Rosenheim, Germany. From a young age, he was fascinated by magic and illusion. As a child, he brought a magic book and began practicing tricks, eventually developing a passion for performing. In his teenage years, he moved to Italy, where he worked as an entertainer, refining his skills for magic. Later, he would return to Germany and performed in clubs before securing a job as a steward and an entertainer on the T.S. Bremen, a luxury cruise ship. It was there that he met Roy Horn, which would change both of their lives and lead to their legendary career together. Now, Roy Horn was actually born Uwe Ludwig Horn on October 3rd, 1944 in Nordenham in Germany. He grew up during and after World War II in a country devastated by war, and his early years were marked by hardship. His mother worked hard to support the family, while his father, who was a soldier, I will let you put together what that means, was absent for much of his childhood. From a young age, Roy was fascinated by animals, particularly exotic ones. He developed a deep bond with them and spent much of his childhood caring for and studying them. At 10 years old, he became especially attached to a pet dog named Hexie, which strengthened his belief in the special connection between humans and animals. His love for wild animals grew after he met a family friend who worked at a zoo, giving him the opportunity to interact with exotic creatures like cheetahs and lions. By the time he was a teenager, Roy had set his sights on working with animals in any capacity. At 13 years old, he left school and started working on a cruise ship where he would eventually meet Siegfried Fischbacher. This fateful meeting led to their lifelong partnership as performers, blending Siegfried's magic with Roy's natural affinity for animals, especially big cats and lions. After meeting on the T.S. Bremen cruise ship in 1957, Siegfried Fischbacher and Roy Horn developed a unique act combining magic and exotic animals. Roy, fascinated by big cats, secretly brought a cheetah named Chico on board, which inspired their signature blend of illusion and wildlife. It also ended up with them getting fired and kicked off the cruise ship. However, their act quickly gained attention, leading them to perform at European nightclubs and theaters, particularly in Germany and Switzerland. Their big break came in 1966 when they were invited to perform in Monte Carlo, where they won praise from industry professionals and casino executives alike. In 1967, they made their Las Vegas debut at the Tropicana in a show called Folies Bergerie. I think that's how you would say that. Their performance, featuring tigers and breathtaking illusions, impressed casino owners, leading to larger bookings at venues like the Stardust and the MGM Grand. By the late 1970s and the early 1980s, they were headlining major Las Vegas productions, and their popularity skyrocketed. They became known for their lavish costumes, grand illusions, and the deep bond with their big cats, particularly their white tigers and lions. Both men officially moved to the United States and became naturalized citizens in 1988. In 1990, Siegfried and Roy signed a record-breaking $57 million per year contract to headline at the Mirage in Las Vegas. Their show, which ran for over 13 years and had more than 5,000 performances, became one of the most popular in Vegas history, drawing over 10 million people and grossing over $1.5 billion. The production was a spectacle, featuring elaborate stage illusions, aerobatics, and over 20 white lions and tigers. Their tigers became their signature, with Roy often referring to them as his children. During a period of their careers, Fishbacker and Horn were romantically involved, although they always avoided discussing this part of their private lives to the public. On October 3rd, 2003, the legendary illusionist duo suffered a career-ending tragedy when Roy Horn was attacked by one of their beloved white tigers, Montecore, during a live performance at the Mirage in Las Vegas. This shocking incident brought an abrupt and tragic end to a decades-long career that had redefined Las Vegas entertainment and had set a new standard for magic performances involving exotic animals. On that evening, Siegfried and Roy were in the middle of their act when Montecore, a 7-year-old, 400-pound white Bengal tiger, unexpectedly deviated from routine. Roy attempted to guide the tiger back on track, but something went terribly wrong. Now, some accounts suggest that Roy tripped, while others speculate that an audience member's action may have startled the tiger. Another theory suggests that Roy may have suffered a medical emergency such as a stroke, which caused Montecore to react instinctively. In any case, the tiger suddenly grabbed Roy by the back of the neck and dragged him off stage in front of a horrified audience. Trainers and stagehands rushed to intervene, using fire extinguishers and other deterrents to separate Montecore from Roy, but the damage had already been done. Roy suffered devastating injuries, including a crushed windpipe and massive blood loss. He was rushed to a hospital where he underwent emergency surgery. During or shortly after the attack, he suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed on his left side. Although he survived, he never fully recovered, and his ability to perform was permanently impaired. As a result, Siegfried and Roy's long-running show, which had been a staple of the Mirage since 1990, was immediately shut down, marking the end of an era in Las Vegas entertainment. The incident led to widespread speculation about what had caused Montecore's behavior. Roy himself maintained that the tiger had not acted out of aggression, but rather out of concern, possibly attempting to protect him after sensing something was wrong. Animal behavior experts, however, debate this explanation, suggesting that the tiger may have simply been following its natural instincts, reacting to an unfamiliar situation in a way that no amount of training could fully prevent. Despite the controversy, Montecore was not euthanized. Instead, he continued to be cared for by Siegfried and Roy until his death in 2014. In 2009, Siegfried, Roy, and Montecore made a brief and public appearance, which would be their final appearance for a charity event, though they never performed together again. The attack had forever changed all of their lives and careers. Roy's health remained fragile for the rest of his life, and he eventually passed away in 2020 due to complications related to COVID-19. Siegfried followed shortly after in 2021, succumbing to pancreatic cancer. Despite the tragic end to their performances, Siegfried and Roy's legacy remains intact. They revolutionized the world of stage magic, blending grand illusions with the exotic presence of white tigers and lions, creating a spectacle that had never been seen before. Their contributions to entertainment, as well as their role in wildlife conservation efforts, ensure that their impact will be remembered for generations. However, their story also serves as a reminder of the unpredictable nature of wild animals, even those raised in captivity, and it reignited discussions on the ethics of using exotic animals in live performance.
You had a chunk of your arm taken out by a lion,
Yes,
right?
it was not a chunk, it was just a
33
nip.
stitches?
It was a nip, yes. But what happened, it was sometimes, you forget
What did you do?
how far you can go. I went in the wrong moment into his...
He overstepped his territory. Well, you can't play macho with them, and that's what he tried to do.
Oh, yes, a good fool.
An animal is so pure, it's so direct. There is no in-between. The way how you speak to him, this is the way how it comes back.
Good.
I am never the boss. The luckiest I ever can be, as they call me my friend.
Unlocking the mystery.
Remember that movie?
I was only a little kid in 2003. I would have been 10. I was 10 years old when this happened, but I remember it. I remember my parents seeing it on the news, and telling me about it. And I don't know why this story was so it has stuck in my mind so vividly. There's also a bit of a Mandela effect here for me, because I swear that I saw footage of the attack on TV, but when I went to write the script and prepare this episode, I couldn't find the footage of the actual attack anywhere. It was only recreations or footage from previous shows that they had kind of like spliced audio in, like the crowd going "ooh" to make it sound like that was the real one, but I couldn't find the actual video of Roy being attacked by the tiger, which leads me to believe that there isn't any, and that my little child brain just made it up. But can you imagine, like, you're in Las Vegas, and you're on a night out, and you go see a magic show, which I think would be heaps of fun. I'd love to do that. Maybe you're a little drunk, maybe you're a little inebriated on other substances. It's like that scene in Knocked Up where Paul Rudd and Seth Rogen go to see Cirque du Soleil, and they're on mushrooms. Imagine that, but then you see the tiger attack the guy. It'd be pretty brutal. Yeah. But even after the attack, Roy was apparently, I heard a report that allegedly, as Roy was being carried out of the venue to go to the hospital, he was still conscious, and he was saying, like, do not harm the tiger, do not euthanize Montecore. It's not its fault. And I really respect that. And I really respect that, yeah, the tiger was not euthanized, and the two partners continued to look after him for the rest of the tiger's life. So for like another 11 years, because I think it died in 2014. Was it 2014? Let me just check my script. Yeah, 2014. So yeah, another 11 years they looked after this tiger before it passed away. Yeah, and they did appear together back in 2009 for a charity performance, and I read that they did not have a lot of time. It was a pretty last minute thing, but they did say that because their performances ended quite abruptly with the with the tiger attack, that charity performance or the charity appearance was a way for them to sort of dot the I's and cross the T and put a button on their careers. It was like a final farewell for them. So they said they actually really enjoyed appearing for that. One thing I didn't mention was Roy's, I did say that his health continued to be frail throughout his life. His voice was never the same again. He was never able to talk normally, I guess, ever again. That was a result of obviously the injuries, but also potentially due to the stroke that he had. It is an interesting theory that potentially he had a stroke during the show, and that's what caused the tiger to attack or to act as it acted. But I guess we'll never know. It's very hard to know what it was. Some people in the audience reported that that an audience member made a loud sound, like an unexpected sound, or called out, or stood up, or potentially was wearing something shiny. I also read that preceding the attack, that the tiger, when it deviated off script, it started coming towards the audience, and Roy put himself between the tiger and the audience to try and get it back on track, and it actually bit his hand before it bit him on the neck, which that's just eyewitness testimony, so we'll just have to believe that. But yeah, these two men, quite interesting careers, all the way from World War II. I kind of didn't click into how old they would have been when they passed away a couple of years ago. But yeah, they were born directly during, right at the beginning of World War II. So they grew up, during and post World War II. And like I said, Horn's father was a soldier, and he was a German soldier. So kind of, I'll leave that to you to figure out what his belief systems might have been. Although I guess it is worth saying not every German soldier was a Nazi. I think that's true. Is that true? I don't know. Maybe they were. Maybe they were. I don't know. I wasn't there. Yeah. There's plenty of Nazi stuff happening. I don't need to chime in. I can just watch TV any day or watch the news. But yeah, that was Siegfried and Roy. A tragedy, but a also very compelling career, very interesting gentleman. And I didn't know this. I didn't know that they were allegedly romantically involved throughout their lives. Although, looking at the costumes and the pageantry, I am not surprised. Good for them, I say. Good for them. Yeah, okay, never mind. Scratch that. Maybe delete it from the edit. I don't know. But today, we are talking about a story that we've wanted to talk about for a while. Actually, one of the suggested topics in one of the Spotify comments that we read through in the last episode. Someone said, would you ever do an episode on the killing of Cecil the Lion? And today, my friends and my enemies, this is what we're doing. We are going to be covering the death of Cecil the Lion, a big story back in 2015, a decade ago. And yeah, like a decade almost to the month. This was July in 2015, and we are recording this in February. So nearly 10 years ago. But yeah, this was a huge story. It blew up and went absolutely viral. It's probably one of the biggest animal stories of the decade. So we're going to talk about it. So, folks, light a bowl of your favorite icky sticky, and let's get into it. This is episode 122, I think, The Killing of Cecil the Lion.
For a tourist on safari, this is the dream shot. A close-up encounter with one of the Big Five. That's a term coined by big game hunters for the 5 most dangerous African animals to hunt on foot. And that's exactly what happened to this lion.
We lost one of the icons.
Cecil, with his distinctive dark mane, was a star, the best-known animal in Hwenge National Park. Officials say earlier this month, Cecil was lured out of the protected park with bait, then he was shot. First with an arrow, then 40 hours later, finished off with a gun by a tourist who paid $55,000 to local guides.
The person involved, or the offender, is a gentleman who is an American called Walter James Palmer.
Palmer, a Minnesota dentist who's a star of his own in the world of bow hunting. He's traveled the world to bag a zoo's worth of animals, from leopards to rhinos, but not always legally. In 2008, he was sentenced to a year of probation for making a false statement to wildlife officials after killing a black bear. In a statement today, Palmer said he was sorry he'd shot Cecil. I had no idea that the lion I took was a known local favorite, was collared and part of a study until the end of the hunt. I relied on the expertise of my local professional guides to ensure a legal hunt. Around the world, outrage over Cecil's death is growing. An online mob lit their torches, took to Twitter, and crashed the dentist's website. Some angry Minnesotans even turned up at the dentist's office and home, but he wasn't there.
It upsets me that people can be so stupid to take a life like that, whether it's human or not.
The thing is, shooting lions is legal in Zimbabwe if you have the right permit. But according to researchers, of the 34 tagged lions that died over the last decade and a half, 24 were shot by sport hunters. The 2 Zimbabweans who helped bag Cecil will be charged with poaching. Authorities say Cecil's skin will be used as evidence. His head still hasn't been found.
In July 2015, a lion was lured out of the protected Hwenge National Park in Zimbabwe, shot with a bow and arrow, and left to suffer for hours before he was finally killed. His name was Cecil, and his death sparked international outrage. It wasn't just the brutality of the killing that made headlines, it was who killed him, why he did it, and what it revealed about the dark world of trophy hunting. But nearly a decade later, what actually has changed? Did Cecil's death mean anything in the long run, or was it just another viral outrage that faded into memory? Today, we're diving into the story behind the headlines, the hunter, the hunted, and the complicated legacy of Cecil the Lion. Cecil was named after Cecil Rhodes, a British businessman, politician, and mining magnate who was also the namesake of Rhodesia, now known as Zimbabwe. Another lion, assumed to be Cecil's brother, was spotted in Hwenge National Park in 2008. During 2009, the 2 lions encountered an established pride, resulting in a fight in which Cecil's brother was killed and both Cecil and the pride leader were seriously injured. The previous leader was then mercy killed by park rangers due to wounds sustained during the fight with Cecil. Cecil retreated to another part of the park where he finally formed his own pride with up to 22 members. In 2013, 2 young male lions forced Cecil out of the region and onto the park's eastern border. There, he formed a coalition with another male lion named Jericho to form 2 prides consisting of Cecil, Jericho, half a dozen females, and up to a dozen children sired by either Cecil or Jericho. Scientists from the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit at the University of Oxford had been studying the park's lions, including Cecil, as part of a research experiment that began in 1999, and his activities have been tracked all the way to 2008. 34 of the 62 lions tagged during the study period had died, including 24 due to sport hunting. Of the adult male lions tagged inside the park, 72 were killed during sport hunting in the surrounding areas. In 2013, 49 hunted lion carcasses were transported from Zimbabwe as trophies. From 2005 to 2008, the Zimbabwe hunt offtake, which means licensed killings, averaged about 42 lions per year. The African Wildlife Foundation discovered that the African lion population had plummeted by 43% between 1997 and 2017. The African lion is now classified as a vulnerable species, with humans serving as its sole predator. Cecil was the primary attraction of Hwange National Park, distinguished by his black fringed mane and GPS tracking collar. One of the project's researchers had said that Cecil had become so popular because he was used to people, enabling vehicles to go as close as 10 meters away, making it easier for visitors and researchers to photograph and observe him. However, according to Alex Magasia, an assistant to the Zimbabwean Prime Minister, Cecil was only known to a subset of the population. Other sources stated that 99.99% of Zimbabweans had never even heard of Cecil. So, let's get into what happened to Cecil. On June 15th, Walter J. Palmer, an American dentist and recreational game hunter, reportedly paid $50,000 to Theo Bronkhorst, a Zimbabwean professional hunter guide, to help him kill a lion. On the late afternoon of July 1st, Bronkhorst and wildlife tracker Cornelius Nkumbe constructed a hunting blind at Antoinette Farm, a private property owned by Honest Nvaldu just across a railway track from the park. Between 9 and 11 p.m, Palmer shot Cecil with an arrow from his compound bow whilst hiding. The hunters tracked the injured lion and finally killed him with a second arrow the following morning, which was approximately 10 to 12 hours later, at a distance of less than 250 meters. Cecil's body was skinned and his head was removed. When park authorities discovered the lion's headless skeleton, which had already been picked clean by vultures, his tracking collar was also missing, and he had been dumped several kilometers away. The hunt occurred outside the protected Hwange National Park, but within the lion's typical home range. Biologist Andrew Loveridge claimed that Palmer's companions, Bronkhorst and Nkumbe, carried the carcass of an African elephant killed earlier in the week around 300 meters from the park to lure Cecil out. The lion was connected with a satellite tracking device that captured location data every 2 hours. The position data was then stitched together. This was the interpretation of events that was supported by a subsequent examination by Zimbabwe National Parks and Wildlife Management, and it is compatible with the satellite data. The 2 Zimbabweans were later arrested by the police. Bronkhorst stated in July 2015, "We had obtained the permit for bow hunting and the permit for the lion from the council." By this point, Palmer had already returned to the United States, where he issued a statement saying he had relied on the expertise of my local professional guide to ensure a legal hunt, and, quote, "I deeply regret that my pursuit of an activity that I love and practice responsibly and legally resulted in the taking of this lion." The killing of Cecil the lion in July 2015 set off a firestorm of outrage that extended far beyond the Zimbabwean borders, rippling across the world in a way that few wildlife controversies ever had. What might have otherwise been just another case of trophy hunting quickly escalated into an international scandal, fueled by the fact that Cecil was no ordinary lion. He was a well-known and heavily studied animal, beloved by researchers, conservationists, and tourists alike. His death, especially the brutal way in which he was killed, became a flashpoint for the global debate on the ethics of hunting, conservation, and the exploitation of Africa's wildlife by wealthy foreign hunters. Now, within Zimbabwe, reactions were complex and in some cases conflicted. Conservationists and park officials were appalled, particularly because Cecil had been a major attraction for Hwange National Park, drawing tourists from around the world. His loss was therefore more than just an emotional blow, it had real economic implications for the local tourism industry, which relied on iconic animals such as him to attract visitors. Zimbabwean authorities launched an immediate investigation, as Cecil's GPS collar, a crucial part of an ongoing Oxford University research study, had remained intact and led to the discovery of his body. The government initially suggested it might press charges against Walter Palmer, the American dentist who had killed Cecil. They also arrested the two Zimbabwean men who had assisted the hunt, professional hunter Theo Brockhurst and landowner Honest Nuvalu. Both men faced legal scrutiny for their roles in illegally luring Cecil out of the protected area, although their cases were eventually collapsed in court. However, among some Zimbabwean citizens, particularly those living in rural areas near the park, there was a certain degree of frustration with the international reaction. Many questioned why the world was suddenly so outraged over the death of one lion, when Zimbabwe faced larger, more pressing issues such as poverty, political instability, and a poaching crisis that killed countless other animals each year. Some critics even pointed out that wealthy Western nations seemed more moved by the killing of a single lion than by the struggles of Zimbabwe's poor population. Global outrage and backlash against Walter Palmer internationally, the reaction was swift and overwhelmingly furious. Social media played a massive role in amplifying the outrage, with the hashtag Cecil the Lion trending worldwide within hours of the story breaking. The fact that Palmer had killed Cecil in such a drawn-out and gruesome manner, wounding him with a bow and arrow only to let him suffer for hours before finishing the job, had added to public anger. Palmer, a dentist from Minnesota, quickly became the target of global condemnation. His social media posts were flooded with hate messages, and animal rights activists called for him to be extradited to Zimbabwe to face charges. Protesters gathered outside his dental practice, forcing him to temporarily close his office and go into hiding. His name and face were plastered across news outlets, with many questioning how someone could pay tens of thousands of dollars to kill a majestic, endangered animal purely for sport. Prominent celebrities and public figures joined in the backlash. British comedian Ricky Gervais, a vocal advocate for animal rights, tweeted angrily about the incident, calling Palmer a killer dentist and questioning the morality of trophy hunting. Talk show host Jimmy Kimmel gave an emotional monologue about Cecil on his late-night show, tearing up as he condemned the killing and encouraged people to donate to Oxford's Wildlife Conservation Research Unit, which had been studying Cecil. His appeal led to an outpouring of donations, with the research unit receiving over $150,000 within the next few days. Even some politicians weighed in on it. In the US, Senator Bob Menendez introduced the Cecil Act, which stands for Conserving Ecosystems by Ceasing the Importation of Large Animal Trophies Act, which aimed to make it harder for Americans to import hunting trophies from species considered threatened or endangered. Though the act ultimately did not pass, it did demonstrate how Cecil's death had become a symbol for broader policy discussions around wildlife conservation. Now, while much of the world condemned the killing, there was also those who defended Palmer and the practice of trophy hunting. Before we get into this, let's talk about what trophy hunting actually is, because even though I've heard of it many times, and I feel like I have a general understanding of what it is, if you were to question me on the specifics of what trophy hunting is, I probably couldn't tell you the ins and outs. So let's take a moment to talk about how trophy hunting in Africa actually works. So, trophy hunting in Africa is a legal, highly structured industry that involves wealthy hunters, often from the US or Europe, paying large sums of money to hunt wild animals. And while it remains one of the most controversial conservation strategies, proponents argue that when properly regulated, it can provide funding for conservation efforts and local communities. Critics, however, see it as an unethical practice that threatens the already vulnerable wildlife populations. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my opinion on trophy hunting at the end of this. But for now, let's talk about some of the basics of trophy hunting. So, trophy hunting typically involves a licensed hunt where hunters pay for the opportunity to kill a specific animal, often one of the big 5 species. We've talked about this on the show before, but that is a lion, an elephant, a leopard, a buffalo, and the rhinoceros. The term trophy refers to the preserved body parts such as skins, skulls, and mounted heads that hunters take home as souvenirs. Unlike poaching, which is illegal and done without regulation, trophy hunting is legally sanctioned by governments and wildlife authorities. It is regulated through quotas, permits, and strict guidelines designed to ensure that only certain animals are hunted. Most trophy hunters come from wealthy Western nations like the United States, Canada, Germany, Spain, and the United Kingdom. And these hunters often pay between $10,000 and $100,000 per expedition, depending on the species and location. The most sought-after species, such as lions and elephants, tend to command the highest prices. Hunters often argue that they are drawn to the challenge, the tradition, and the sport of hunting. Some also believe they are contributing to conservation by funding wildlife protection programs through their fees. However, many critics view trophy hunting as a purely selfish activity that exploits endangered species for personal gain. So, how does this process work? Well, step 1 is selecting the hunt and paying for the fee. Hunters book their trips through professional hunting outfitters, many of whom operate in South Africa, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, and Botswana. These outfitters work with landowners or government agencies to obtain the necessary permits. Each species has a different price tag, with the most expensive hunts including lions, which can range between $30,000 and $50,000, elephants between $40,000 and $70,000, leopards between $25,000 and $40,000, and rhinoceroses can go for over $100,000 for rare subspecies. This price typically includes accommodation, guides, and the hunting experience itself. Step 2, tracking and killing the animal. Once in the field, professional guides, often called PHs, lead the hunters to designated areas where the animals can be legally hunted. Depending on the species, hunts may take place on private game reserves where animals are bred and controlled, government-managed hunting concessions, which are large wildlife areas with specific quotas, communal conservations where local communities allow hunting for revenue. The method of killing does vary. Some hunters use rifles, while others prefer more traditional methods such as bows and arrows. In most cases, the goal is to make a clean kill, but in reality, animals are sometimes wounded and suffer for hours before finishing off. Case in point, Cecil the lion. Step 3, harvesting the trophy. After the animal is killed, its head, skin, and other body parts are preserved and prepared for taxidermy. The remains may be shipped internationally depending on the hunter's home country import laws. For example, I'm pretty sure Australia would have very strict laws because you can't even get a fucking chocolate bar in this country. Number 4, government fees and conservation contributions. A portion of the hunting fee is supposed to go towards conservation efforts, anti-poaching initiatives, and local communities. In theory, these funds help sustain wildlife populations by protecting habitats and deterring illegal poaching. However, in some cases, corruption and mismanagement means the money never reaches its intended targets. Proponents of trophy hunting argue that it generates crucial revenue for conservation and rural communities. In many African countries, national parks and conservation agencies are underfunded, and controlled hunting brings in revenue that can be used for wildlife management, anti-poaching patrols, and habitat restoration. According to some estimates, 40 to 60% of hunting fees go to government agencies, 20 to 30% goes to local communities supporting schools, infrastructure, and employment, and 10 to 20% can go to hunting outfitters and landowners. However, critics argue that much of the money is lost due to corruption, poor oversight, and a lack of reinvestment into the conservation efforts. Studies have shown that in some countries, only a fraction of the hunting revenue actually benefits local people or wildlife. So now that we have a clearer understanding of what the process of trophy hunting is, let's talk about the response from the killing of Cecil the lion from the hunting community. So while much of the world was condemning the dentist and the killing, there were also those who defended Palmer and the practice of trophy hunting. Some hunters argued that regulated hunting contributes to conservation efforts by generating revenue for national parks. They claimed that Palmer had paid a large sum for a legal hunt, and the blame should fall on Zimbabwean guides and landowners who had lured Cecil out of the park. Organizations such as Safari Club International, a major pro-hunting group, initially stood by Palmer, but later distanced themselves as public outrage grew. They revoked the membership of both Palmer and Theo Bronkhorst, indicating that they viewed the hunt as unethical, even if not technically illegal. At the same time, African hunting advocates pointed out that economic realities of conservation. Some conservationists and rural communities that benefited from legal hunting income feared that the backlash against Cecil's killing would lead to a blanket ban on trophy hunting, potentially cutting off a significant source of funding for conservation programs. In countries like Zimbabwe and Namibia, where controlled hunting has been used as a means of wildlife management, officials worried that the uproar would reduce funding for anti-poaching efforts, as hunters typically pay hefty fees that help sustain local conservation initiatives. Cecil's death did lead to a wave of policy shifts in corporate decisions, particularly in the transportation industry. In response to the public outcry, major airlines including Delta, United, and American Airlines announced bans on transporting big game hunting trophies. Several European airlines followed suit, making it more difficult for hunters to bring back lion skins, elephant tusks, and other trophies. Some countries also reviewed their hunting policies. The US Fish and Wildlife Service added lions in certain regions to the Endangered Species Act, which imposed stricter regulations on trophy imports. The European Union also began scrutinizing hunting permits more closely, adding new restrictions on the importation of lion trophies. However, despite the initial surge of activism, trophy hunting remains legal in many parts of Africa. While Cecil's death did raise awareness about the threats lions face, hunting continues to be a controversial and heavily debated conservation strategy. Some experts argue that without the alternative funding sources, banning hunting outright could do more harm than good, as it might reduce the financial incentives for landowners to maintain habitats for the wildlife. So let's talk about the emotional and cultural legacy of Cecil. Even years after his death, even 10 years after his death, Cecil has remained a powerful symbol of wildlife conservation. His story has been the subject of books, documentaries, and countless articles examining the ethics of trophy hunting and the broader challenges protecting Africa's lions. Conservation groups continue to use his name to rally support for stronger protections against hunting and poaching, and his image still invokes discussions about the future of endangered species. For many people, Cecil was not just a lion. He represented the growing tension between human activity and wildlife preservation. His killing forced the world to confront some unforgettable questions. Should wealthy foreigners be allowed to hunt endangered species for sport? Can conservation efforts truly coexist with trophy hunting? And what responsibility do governments, corporations, and individuals have in protecting the planet's most vulnerable creatures? While the international outrage has largely faded over time, Cecil's story still remains a haunting reminder of how one act can spark a global reckoning, and how difficult it is to find solutions that satisfy both ethical concerns and conservation needs. In recent years, public pressure has led to stricter regulations and bans on trophy hunting in certain countries. Botswana, for example, banned all trophy hunting in 2014, although this was later reinstated in 2019 due to pressure from local communities. Many airlines, including Delta, United, and British Airways, have continued to make it harder for hunters to bring home their kills. At the same time, conservationists continue to debate whether banning trophy hunting entirely is a viable solution. Some argue that alternative revenue sources such as ecotourism and photographic safaris could replace hunting revenue without harming wildlife. Others warn that without hunting income, some conservation areas might struggle to survive, leading to increased poaching and habitat destruction. Ultimately, the future of trophy hunting in Africa remains uncertain. While Cecil the Lion's killing brought global attention to the issue, the fundamental tensions between conservation, economics, and ethics remain unsolved. Whether trophy hunting is truly a tool for conservation or just a way for wealthy people to exploit Africa's wildlife, it's still one of the most contentious debates in modern conservation. And that's it, guys. That's pretty much all there is to know about Cecil the lion and trophy hunting in Africa. Now, as to my opinion on the sport of trophy hunting, I am personally against it. I understand the argument that it brings in, crucial funding, but I also think that that's just a smokescreen. And that's an excuse, really. It's an excuse that wealthy people get to throw out there. Like, I paid $50,000 for this hunt. $50,000 goes to the protection of all the other animals. If that's really what their intention was, they could just donate the $50,000. You could just donate the money to the conservation. You know what you could do? You could spend the $50,000. You could fly to Africa. You could stay in the hotel. You could have the guides lure the animals out, and you could even hold the rifle up and look through the scope. All you'd have to do differently is not shoot it. Or, what you could do? You could shoot it with a tranquilizer and watch it pass out. Take a photo with the sleepy animal, and just that's it. Leave it at that point, So I've had conversations with hunters in the past, and I don't have a problem with hunting when it's for food, or really even for like sport. I guess if you're hunting like animals like birds or pigs or stuff, I guess sure. I feel it makes me feel a little bit more uncomfortable about that, but I guess depending on the situation, that's okay. But trophy hunting is just there are not that many of these animals left, guys. They're already particularly vulnerable. So I guess I just don't get the mindset of looking at a majestic creature like a lion or an elephant and thinking, yeah, I want to fucking kill that and chop its head off. I just think that makes you a psycho. And if that offends you, whatever, like, that's fine. That's just my opinion. I cannot get in the mindset of someone who can see an animal like that and be like, yeah, that'd look good on my den wall. Take a photograph, you fucking moron. Anyway, that's the story of Cecil the lion. I hope you learned a little bit about that story, and I hope we all learned a little bit about trophy hunting. It is a contentious debate. So, as any listener of this show would be very well aware by now, India is home to some of the world's most iconic wildlife. They have Bengal tigers, cobras, they have sloth bears, but few of these creatures can hold the same cultural weight, or literal weight, I suppose, as the Indian elephant. These are towering, intelligent, and deeply symbolic animals. And Indian elephants are revered in religion, featured in festivals, and they're even given honorary statues in some villages. They're considered living deities by many, but these animals aren't just sacred symbols. They're real, complex creatures navigating a rapidly shrinking wild. As forests are carved up for farms, railways, and cities, elephants are increasingly forced into close and often deadly contact with humans. Now, the Indian elephant, also known as Elephas maximus indicus, is a subspecies of the Asian elephant that has roamed the Indian subcontinent for thousands of years. Evolving from ancient Proscodians that once shared the planet with mammoths and mastodons, Indian elephants are uniquely adapted to life in forested and grassland environments. Now, they're slightly smaller than their African cousins, and they have smaller ears, a domed head, and a single finger-like projection on the tip of their trunk. These are highly intelligent and social animals, and they live in tight-knit matriarchal herds and communicate through a complex system of vocalizations, infrasound, and body language. Their diet is strictly vegetarian, grass, bark, fruit, and leaves, but an adult male can consume over 150 kilograms of food in a single day. Wow, that's a lot of food. That's me in a bit. That's me in a bit of food a day. And this can become a serious problem when their habitat is fragmented and farmlands become the nearest buffet. Which brings me to today's subject of the story. In this episode, we're not talking about man-eaters in the traditional sense. We're talking about man crushers. Yes, man crushers. Not the kind of man crush that I have on you, Henry, who's listening. I did send you a DM, by the way, Henry, and you haven't replied, so I'd really like you to do that so we can maybe go have a little kiss. Okay. These are man crushers, yes. They're crop raiders, they're fence breakers, and sometimes they're celebrities. Ooh. Because two of these Indian elephants, Arikamban and Padayapa, have gained national attention not for just what they are, but for what they have done. From trampling fields to terrifying villages, these two elephants have been cast as villains, rebels, and even freedom fighters in an unfolding drama that says as much about us as it does about them. Now, are these animals dangerous? Okay, are they misunderstood? Or are they just simply wild elephants trying to survive in a world that's forgotten how to make space for the world's largest land animal? Let's meet Arikamban and Padayapa and decide for ourselves. We're going to start with what I believe is the gentler of the two souls, Padayapa, which again, very fun name to say it. Say it with me now. 1, 2, 3, Padayapa. And if you're Indian and you're telling me that's not how you pronounce it, it's like Padayapa. Or, getting dangerously close to doing a racist accent there. Padayapa. Just keep it to yourself. That's how I'm saying Padayapa, because it's fun, okay? It's fun. Anyway, in the misty hills of Munnar in Kerala, where tea plantations roll like green waves across the Western Ghats, an unlikely figure has captured the imaginations of locals and tourists alike. His name is Padayapa, an enormous wild elephant with long tusks, a gentle gait, and a taste for fresh vegetables. Named after a 1999 Tamil film starring Rajinikanth as a misunderstood hero, Padayapa has become something of a folk figure himself. Padayapa is not feared, but he's watched. He's not hunted, but he is followed. He's not hidden, but he is welcome. Padayapa isn't just another elephant wandering too close to human territory. No. He's part of the community. And for over a decade, he has walked the roads of Munnar like a resident. He ambles through traffic jams he causes himself. He ignores honking vehicles with severe indifference, and occasionally he pauses to browse the offerings at roadside fruit stalls. His daily life is equal parts wildlife encounter and public spectacle. Now, unlike many wild tuskers, which, by the way, tusker sounds like a slur for an elephant, so we're not going to say that anymore. Unlike many wild tuskers, I am going to say it is funny, Padayapa does not come out crashing out of the jungle in a frenzy. He doesn't raid villages at night. He does not panic at the sight of crowds. He strolls in full daylight down highways and market lanes as if he's returning from his daily chores. Vehicles stop, cameras pop out, children point, and no one screams, because he's not a ghost in the trees, he's a presence, and he is very much alive. He first became known to locals in 2011. Towering at over 9 feet tall, Padayapa was impossible to ignore. But what stood out most was his calm demeanor. He didn't damage homes, he didn't break fences, and he rarely even startled livestock. Instead, he began cultivating a reputation as something almost unthinkable, a polite little wild elephant. Now, that's not to say that he is harmless. Of course, Padayapa is, after all, a 5-ton animal with tusks sharp enough to puncture steel. There have been moments, or incidents even, where things could have gone very, very wrong. Once, he nudged a car too close for comfort. Another time, he blocked a school bus for nearly 20 minutes, causing panic among students and teachers. There's a dog outside barking. I don't know if you can hear that. He's so happy that we're talking about Padayapa. But even in these moments where he's startling students and teachers, even in these moments, he does seem more curious than aggressive. Padayapa is an immovable force, yes, but he's not a malevolent one. Perhaps most famously, Padayapa has a refined palate. What a fancy gentleman. Padayapa prefers to eat bananas, carrots, and tomatoes, often plucked neatly from carts or vendors' stalls. In one widely circulated video, he reaches into the back of a delivery truck and selects a bunch of bananas with surgical precision and walks away without damaging a single crate. Padayapa, he's not the Hulk, okay? He doesn't smash. He samples. He shops. Very cute. Padayapa. Now, over time, he has become more than just a wild elephant. He's become a tourist attraction, a social media darling, and even a small-scale economic boom for the area. Vendors have sold Padayapa souvenirs, local businesses use his name as a playful hook, tourists sometimes ask hotel managers, hey, will we see Padayapa today? As if they're requesting room service from the poor guy who just wants to go home. But this beloved reputation does mask a deeper and more serious story. Padayapa is still a wild animal, and his growing comfort with humans is not entirely a success story. It is, in a lot of ways, a warning. His forest range, like so many in India, has been carved up by roads, plantations, resorts, and power lines. The boundaries between wilderness and civilization are blurring rapidly, and elephants like Padayapa are learning to navigate a world that was not built for them. Authorities have often debated relocating Padayapa, fearing that one bad day could turn a beloved elephant into a dangerous one. But the public has pushed back on this idea. Many locals don't want Padayapa moved. They see him not as a threat, but as a kind of living landmark, one of the few wild things left that doesn't hide from humans. And so far, forest officials have largely left him alone, issuing occasional alerts and asking the public not to approach him too closely. Padayapa, for his part, does seem content. He continues his daily routines, a walk through the town, a stop at the vegetable vendor, and a return to the edge of the forest at dusk. He lingers at the boundary between wild and human, never fully crossing over, but never retreating entirely either. In a country where human-elephant conflicts claim lives every year on both sides, Padayapa is certainly an anomaly. He is a question mark. Can we really coexist? Can a 5-ton elephant in a town of thousands of people find a way to share space without fear, without violence, and without tragedy? And so far, miraculously, the answer seems to be yes. But as with all stories that hinge on coexistence, and we have heard this story happen many times in the past, this is a very fragile coexistence. One misstep could change everything. But for the moment, Padayapa endures, not as a threat, not as a menace, but as a symbol for what could be possible. A wild animal, a local legend, a giant, meandering, fucking massive reminder that sometimes peace can walk on all 4 legs and it can cast a very long shadow. Now, another animal that casts a very long shadow, and potentially one that's not as bright and light as Padayapa, is a Arikomban. Arikomban. His name translates quite literally to, quote, the rice tusker. That sounds like even more of a fucking slur. Jesus. It's like if a tusker was like an elephant, a rice tusker is an Asian elephant. You see how this is bad for me? I'm trapped. I can't not. That's what his name means, rice tusker. Quite poetic. It's not just poetic though. It is branding, because for years this enormous wild elephant roamed the verdant hills of Kerala's Idukki district, raiding ration shops, breaking into homes, and gobbling up sacks of rice like it was his birthright. And in a way, hey, maybe it was. Arikomban was born in the lush mountainous terrain of Chinnakanal region, a place that used to be elephant country. But over time, tea estates, resorts, and government housing began to eat away at the forest. One of those developments was a human settlement called 301 Colony, built directly along an elephant corridor. So for the time he was a calf, Arikomban's home was a tightrope between wilderness and suburbia. He grew up under the watchful eye of his mother, a seasoned matriarch who taught him where to find food, where to drink, and how to avoid humans. That was until she was electrocuted by an illegal electric fence. Yes, sorry, this story gets dark very quickly. Yes, Arikomban's mum was given the electric chair minus the chair. After that, a young Arikomban began to fend for himself, often in the company of other elephants like Chilikomban, another infamous tusker. Yeah, I'm just going to keep going with it. But unlike the others, Arikomban developed a very particular taste. He likes rice. He doesn't like wild grass. Not a big fan of fruit, just rice. Preferably the kind stacked in big burlap bags beneath the thin wooden walls of ration shops. And so began his reign. From about 2017 onwards, a Rincon band began to make regular visits into towns and villages, targeting public distribution centres and ration shops meant for low-income families. There are dozens of reports, each one eerily similar. A shadow in the mist, a thunderous crash, a wall caving in, and then silence as a Rincon band hoovers up the sacks of rice with his trunk, dusts off the floor for any leftovers, and strolls back into the forest like a really fucking big ghost. Now, to some locals, this just became routine. You'd wake up, you'd find the door hanging off its hinges, and you'd go, fuck, a Rincon band came again. But to others, especially those injured or displaced by this rampage, it was anything but charming. Now, there were reports of injuries, elderly residents knocked over in the panic, children terrified in their sleep. In 2021, one man actually died during a stampede caused by a Rincon band's disturbance. Now, I want to make that clear. The elephant didn't directly harm him. He was trampled by the people running away at the panic of the elephant. Still, the story, it's never simple. Many activists and locals pushed back, saying a Rincon band wasn't a rogue, he's a refugee. That he was only in these areas because humans had taken over the land that he used to roam very freely. But as the pressure mounted, the government finally took action. In March of 2023, officials launched a massive and very controversial capture operation. For 48 hours, over 150 forest officials, veterinarians, and trained elephants known as kumkis searched the forests. Helicopters flew overhead, drones scanned the canopy. Finally, after a long chase, a Rincon band was darted, sedated, and trucked out of the area. He was relocated to Perrier Tiger Reserve, which, by the way, if I'm an elephant and you stick me in a place called a tiger reserve, it's like putting me in a place called Punch the Fat Guy Club. Bad place to be if you're a fat guy. I'm skinny fat. That's what I am. I'm skinny fat. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He was relocated to Perrier Tiger Reserves, but within weeks, he wandered out, traveling over 300 kilometers through the forests and farmlands, and eventually ending up in the Calicut Mundrathuri Tiger Reserve. I'm so bad at these names. I need to go to India and just learn how to speak this language. But he ended up in another tiger reserve, 300 kilometers away, and that's where it happened again. In June of 2023, a Rincon band entered the town of, and you're going to love this, let me spell it out for you and you'll find why I'm finding this so funny. This town is spelled Cumbum. That's right. A Rincon band entered Cumbum. I want to move to Cumbum. Fantastic. I'm going to be the mayor of Cumbum. What are my qualifications to be the mayor of Cumbum? Well, I think it's in the name itself. I am the best at well, you can guess the rest. Now this town, Cumbum, is located in Tamil Nadu. I can pronounce that because it's only 4 letters each. It's 5 letters. Tamil Nadu. Chaos erupted in Cumbum. Sorry, I've got to stop. Man, these tuskers in Cumbum, it's crazy. Chaos erupted. Vehicles overturned, shops were destroyed, one person died of a heart attack during the panic, and it seemed that relocation had done nothing to stop the problem. So, the elephant with the rice habit became a full-blown national controversy. Wildlife officials tried again, this time fitting him with a GPS collar to monitor his movements instead of relocating him. And in the years since, something remarkable has happened. No new attacks. No new deaths. A Rincon band began avoiding populated areas. He now sticks to the forest. His GPS trail tells a story of an elephant who, once given the space, prefers solitude. Today, a Rincon band remains a living symbol of India's fractured relationship with its wildlife. To some, he's still a threat. To others, he's a tragic hero. He's inspired protests, court cases, songs, memes, and even children's books. I hope in the children's books it's not set in Cumbum. One thing is certain, though. A Rincon band is not just another elephant. He's a Rincon band, the rice-loving tusker who reminded the world that even a giant can be pushed too far. At a glance, Arinkamban and Padayapa seem like total opposite ends of a very tusky spectrum. One, a secretive raider of ration shops chased through the forests of Kerala and Tamil Nadu in a high-stakes capture operation. The other, a camera-loving wanderer who strolls through the hills stations like he's on a casual grocery run. Arinkamban, the fugitive, Padayapa, the fancy little gentleman. One is feared, one is adored. But if you look closer, you start to see it's not just differences, but deep, almost poetic parallels. Both elephants are the products of human-altered landscapes. Born in once sprawling forests now carved up by plantations, roads, and settlements, they were each forced into unnatural proximity with people. Not by curiosity, but by necessity. Their habitat wasn't just lost, it was replaced with food. Rice sacks, vegetable stalls, bananas stacked in crates. In the war between instinct and opportunity, opportunity won. Arinkamban's story plays out like a tragedy. He was orphaned young, losing his mother to an electric fence that was put up illegally. He grew up shadowing the other bulls and soon earned a reputation for raiding government ration shops, stealing sacks of rice in the dead of night, breaking walls and sometimes bones. The headlines called him a menace. Officials launched multi-day operations to capture him. And when he was finally caught and relocated, he walked 300 kilometers right back into human territory, because that's the only territory that he actually knew. Padayapa, on the other hand, well, he chose by visibility. He didn't sneak into towns in the cover of darkness. He walked in, he strolled in during broad daylight, calmly picking vegetables off roadside stalls and weaving through traffic as cameras clicked all around him. He's actually been called a model citizen of the wild. He's never hurt anyone, and he's never caused a panic, really. He always retreats peacefully into the trees. Locals describe him like a familiar uncle, and not the kind of uncle that touches you in cum bum. He's the town's personality. But for all their differences in temperament, in tactics, and in public image, the root cause of their behavior is still the same. It's displacement. Arinkamban and Padayapa are not anomalies, but they're messengers. Their stories reflect the broader crisis of the human-elephant conflict in India, where wild corridors have become battle zones and elephants are forced to either adapt or be shot and killed. What's most striking to me, perhaps, is the public perception and how that shaped their fates. Arinkamban was declared a threat. He was tranquilized, relocated, tracked, and blamed for deaths, even when those deaths came from panic, not violence from him. Padayapa, though just as disruptive in theory, was granted celebrity status. His image was lovable, his story was gentle, and so he got to remain free. It's the same species, it's the same region, it's the same shrinking forest, but it's a wildly different story. And in both of these stories lies the question, what makes one elephant a criminal and the other one a folk hero? Is it behavior? Is it branding? Is it damage? Is it demeanor? Or maybe it's simply which side of the road they happen to walk down. In the end, Arinkamban and Padayapa are not villains, and they're not saints either. They're just wild elephants navigating a world that no longer knows how to hold them. They're survivors. They're symbols. And they're warnings. And if we're paying attention, perhaps our last and maybe our best chance to figure out how to live alongside something truly, irreversibly wild. So, listen up, dear listener, because you and I live in a world that is positively crawling with uninvited guests. Organisms that are so alien, so insidious, that they live inside of us. No, my religious friend. They're not demons and they're not beasts, but they are parasitic worms that hijack our bodies, turning them into travel brochures of disease. This episode is going to explore how just a few of these parasites emerge from the shadows to become human nightmares. Now, among the world's most grotesque parasites, few match that of the guinea worm. Racist name, by the way. Now, the guinea worm is unparalleled for its sheer drama and body horror. It's known scientifically as Draconculus medinicensis. That's probably not how you pronounce it. And this nearly eradicated nematode is a relic of an age where contaminated water could be a death sentence, or at the very least, the beginning of a long and agonizing and disgusting ordeal. This infection begins with something as simple and as instinctive as a sip of water. In certain parts of rural Africa and Asia, people have historically relied on stagnant ponds or shallow waterholes for drinking water. These sources can be teeming with tiny water fleas, copepods, that have in turn swallowed the larvae of guinea worms. Now, once inside a human host, the copepod dies and releases the larvae, which passes through the stomach lining and settles into the body cavity. There, they grow, undisturbed, for the better part of a year. When fully grown, the female guinea worm can reach lengths of up to 1 meter. Not content with remaining hidden, she then begins a slow migration through the tissue, usually to the lower limbs. Her goal here isn't the death of the host or herself, but escape. Around the time that she's ready to release her offspring, she triggers a blister on the surface of the victim's skin. The blister burns intensely, often causing the host to seek relief by plunging the affected area into water. This, of course, is exactly what that sneaky worm wants. Upon contact with the water, she bursts through the skin like a chest burster, an alien, and releases hundreds of thousands of larvae, which are promptly swallowed by new copepods. Thus, the cycle begins anew. Now, there is no vaccine for the guinea worm disease. There's no cure, there's no pill, there's no injection. Treatment is painfully primitive. The worm is extracted manually, a few centimeters at a time, and wrapped around a stick. This process can take weeks. If the worm breaks during extraction, it can trigger a severe inflammation and secondary infection. Victims are often left unable to walk or work, with complications that linger far beyond the worm's final exit. At its peak in the 1980s, guinea worm disease afflicted over 3.5 million people annually across more than 20 countries. Today, thank you to the relentless work of many health organizations, most notably the Carter Center, this disease is on the verge of eradication. In 2024, only a handful of cases were recorded, mostly in Chad, South Sudan, and Angola. This makes guinea worm one of the few human diseases that might actually be wiped off the planet without the use of vaccines or modern drugs. Just good old-fashioned public health orders, education, clean water, and keeping infected individuals away from water sources. Now, interestingly, some people believe that the ancient symbol of medicine, the serpent wrapped around a staff, may have actually originated from the image of a guinea worm being pulled from the body. If this is true, it is a chilling and honestly quite foul origin story for what has become a universal icon of healing. Now, the guinea worm might be a fading threat, but it does remain a very somber example of how nature can weaponize itself in even the smallest of creatures. And the guinea worm is not the only of these small creatures that we're going to be talking about today. We're, of course, also going to be talking about blood flukes. Blood flukes. That's the name of an animal that I hate. Imagine wading into a warm, calm river. Ooh, take yourself there. Imagine that. You're walking to a nice river. You feel the mud between your toes, the water lapping. We should put some music on in the background. Let's do that. Some nice calming walking into the river music. Go for it. African drum circle. You ruined the immersion. Prick. Ass. Anyway, you feel the mud between your toes, the water lapping gently around your calves. However, unseen, microscopic creatures are moving with purpose towards you. Within moments, they've pierced your skin, but you won't feel that because there's no bite, there's no sting. The damage, however, has already been done. Now, these invaders are called blood flukes, also known as schistosomes. I'm going to just call them blood flukes. They're blood-dwelling parasitic flatworms responsible for a disease called schistosomiosis, a condition that affects over 200 million people worldwide. Now, schistosomes are flukes, a type of parasitic worm, but they aren't content to loiter in your intestines like some of their more mundane cousins. These creatures are more ambitious. Once inside their body, they head for the bloodstream. Their goal? To make home in your veins, where they can mate and lay thousands of eggs. That's right, they're fucking in your veins. How gross is that? The life cycle of blood flukes is a bizarre relay race between humans and freshwater snails. It starts with eggs excreted in human urine or feces, usually in regions lacking proper sanitation. If those eggs manage to reach fresh water, they hatch into free-swimming larvae that seek out and infect a very specific type of snail. Inside the snail, the larvae multiply and transform into a new, faster form, cercare, fork-tailed swimmers primed to penetrate human skin. Once they've burrowed in, they discard their tails and start migrating through the blood vessels, through the lungs and the liver until they settle in the veins near the intestines or the bladder. There, the male and female worms pair up. Oh, so romantic. Unlike many parasites, blood flukes, well, they're a little bit romantic. The male forms a canal in his body where the female lives. Oh, it's like the ultimate form of being the little spoon. Together, they produce a staggering number of eggs. Some of these eggs exit the body as intended, but many get trapped in the host's tissues. It's not just the worms that cause most of the damage here, it's actually these misplaced eggs. These can cause fierce immune reactions, causing inflammation, scarring, and chronic pain. Over time, this can lead to liver damage, kidney failure, bladder cancer, and severe gastrointestinal or urogenital complications. Children are particularly vulnerable, often suffering from anemia, stunted growth, and learning difficulties due to long-term infection. And because the symptoms can be vague at first, fatigue, rash, low-grade fever, many people don't even realize they're infected until all the complications are irreversible. Now, unlike the guinea worm, which we just talked about, there actually is a treatment for schizomyosis. It's praziquantel, a drug that kills adult worms. It's cheap and it's effective, but it doesn't prevent the actual infection. In areas where people depend on fresh water sources for bathing, washing, and drinking, schizomyosis spreads easily and endlessly. Prevention efforts focus on snail control, water sanitation, and public education, but in many regions, infrastructure challenges make these goals quite difficult to achieve. One of the more surreal aspects of schizome infection is intimacy. These worms don't just live in your body, they live in your bloodstream. They're entwined in a long-term monogamous pairing, laying eggs in your veins. Some live inside the human hosts for a decade or even more. You can think of them as blood-borne squatters with a disgusting and disturbing dedication to reproduction. In evolutionary terms, blood flukes are masterful parasites. They don't kill quickly, they don't need to. Instead, they siphon off years of health, weakening their host just enough to ensure the cycle continues. Blood flukes, it's a slow burn, and it's a parasite's long con. And it all begins with just a simple, relaxing walk in the water. Let's play that relaxing music finally. Damn it. God fucking Christ. Ugh, gross. Okay, speaking of gross, this might be the grossest name for a parasite that we're going to have today. The rat lungworm. Gross. The rat lungworm. Ugh. It's also called, let me see if I can get this, Angiostrongylus cantonensis. We're just going to keep calling it the rat lungworm, or ratty for fun. Ratty is a tiny nematode with an elaborate life cycle and a fatal flaw. Sometimes it ends up in the wrong host. Hasn't that ever happened to you? You've ended up in the wrong host. I don't really know how that would work. In its natural system, it circulates quietly between rats and snails. But when human beings get in the way by accident, it can trigger a nightmarish condition known as, how do I say this one? Encephalic meningitis, an inflammation of the membrane surrounding the brain and the spinal cord. Now, the story begins in rats, where all good stories should. My favorite movie is Ratatouille. Anyway, the story begins in rats, where adult worms live in the pulmonary arteries, which are the blood vessels that connect the heart to the lungs. Here, they mate and they lay eggs. These eggs hatch in the lungs, and the juvenile worms crawl up the rat's windpipe. Ugh, they get swallowed and then are excreted in the feces. Ugh. Oh, that's so bad. This is where the snails and slugs come in. These dirty little boys, well, they feast on rat droppings. It's a niche diet, to be sure, and they ingest the larvae, which then mature inside their soft, little, supple bodies. Just made myself laugh then. Then, somewhere in a garden or a salad bar, an ambitious foraging trip, a human consumes one of these infected snails, or even just a slime trail on unwashed produce. The larval worm enters the body expecting a rat, and instead they get us. Disappointing. Inside the human, they can't really complete their life cycle, but they do what they still can. They migrate towards the brain. Now, it's there that things really start to unravel. The immune system responds to the intruders with fury, sending waves of white blood cells into the brain's lining. Victims can experience headaches, neck stiffness, nausea, numbness, and extreme sensitivity to light. In some cases, the worms burrow deeper, causing paralysis, coma, or even death. Now, outbreaks of ratty have occurred in places like Hawaii, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific Islands, and increasingly in warmer parts of the southern United States. The culprit is usually undercooked snail meat or contaminated produce, but even tiny, unnoticed juvenile slugs in a salad have caused infections. I'm really surprised that the French haven't had this happen to them. You know, seeing how much they love to eat snails, those disgusting frogs. If you're from France, I'm joking. I love you. I love your country. It's nice. I went to Disney World there. Flatworms that prey on snails, like the New Guinea flatworm, also serve as carriers. Now, there's no specific cure for ratty. Treatment focuses on managing symptoms and letting the worms die off naturally. Anti-parasitic drugs can make things worse, actually, if they kill the worm suddenly, because this can trigger a massive immune response in the brain. The rat lungworm, it's a tragic parasite. Not because of its cruelty, but because of a mistake. It doesn't actually want to attack us. It doesn't like us. We're not food for them. It wants ratties. They just simply get lost. But of course, that's little comfort to those who get infected with ratties. Now, if you want to design the perfect parasite for a horror film, you've got the name, rat lungworm. But maybe physically you'd want to come up with something more like the raccoon roundworm. These are microscopic. They're stealthy. And when they infect the wrong host, just like ratties, it doesn't just settle in the gut. It goes on a devastating tour of the brain, the eyes, and the internal organs, leaving chaos in its wake. Now, in raccoons, the worm is harmless enough. Adults live in the intestines, producing tens of thousands of eggs each day. These eggs pass out of the raccoon's feces, which, like a rat poo in previous stories, are everywhere that raccoons go, which is a lot of North America. Yards, attics, sandboxes, and sheds. After a few weeks in that environment, the eggs can become infectious and can survive for years, patiently waiting for a host. Now, humans, especially curious toddlers playing in contaminated dirt or sandpits, they can unknowingly ingest the microscopic eggs. Inside the body, the larvae hatch and begin to migrate, and that's where things really start to get terrifying. Unlike some parasites that specialize in one organ, raccoon roundworm larvae, they wander around aimlessly, chewing their way through tissue, seeking something that they'll never find. If they reach the brain, the result can be seizures, coma, and death. If they end up in the eyes, they'll cause blindness. And if they reach the spinal cord, it can cause paralysis. The condition is known as neutral larva migrans, and it's as awful as it sounds. There's no widely available diagnostic test while the larvae are still on the move. Doctors merely rely on symptoms and exposure history to make a diagnosis. And by the time the signs are clear, it's often too late for an effective intervention. Anti-parasitic drugs may help early in the infection, but once the larvae embeds itself in the brain or the other organs, damage is typically irreversible. Would you like some good news? I think we're all due for a little bit of good news. The good news is human infections are incredibly rare. Oh, there's some bad news as well. Sorry. Should have turned over the page. Always check the back of the page. The bad news is that when they do occur, the outcomes are often catastrophic, especially in children. Now, efforts to reduce risk focus on public education, avoiding raccoon toilets, and thoroughly washing your hands and surfaces, covering sandboxes, and not keeping raccoons as pets. Yes, I'm sorry for those of you keeping a raccoon as a pet. Maybe you rethink that decision. Veterinarians also recommend deworming pet raccoons if they are kept legally. Well, there you go. You can keep Raccoony. Just make sure he's vaccinated. Now, Baylis, this is the name of the disease. It's called Baylisoceriasis pronsonorosus. That's not right. It doesn't mean to be a killer. In raccoons, it thrives in pigs. It doesn't really even hurt the raccoon. But when it crosses species lines, it becomes a parasite of unhinged, microscopic, mindless, and devastating results. Here's one you might have heard of before. It's a pretty... when we talk about parasites, this is kind of like the standard. We're talking tapeworms. Some of you might have had a tapeworm before. I haven't been lucky enough to have a tapeworm. I've heard that it's great because you can lose a lot of weight. That's a joke. Don't actually go out and do that. I know in multiple sitcoms, people eat a tapeworm to lose some weight. I actually don't think it was a sitcom. I think it was just a YouTube video. Anyway, let's talk about tapeworms. Now, tapeworms have haunted the human tummy for a millennia. They're ancient, elegant in their design, and they are disturbingly efficient. Now, whilst most parasites settle for biting, burrowing, or bleeding, the tapeworm, it takes a different approach. It doesn't attack, it simply moves in, uninvited, like a bad roommate, and it starts absorbing your food. Wow, exactly like a bad roommate. I had a roommate once, I hope they don't hear this, they only ever ate Milo cereal and sausage rolls. And the other one only ate mandarins. I don't know how well they're doing right now. Tapeworms are flatworms from the class Cestoda, and they can be astonishingly long. Some species grow up to 25 meters inside the human intestines. They don't have a mouth, and they don't have a digestive tract. Instead, they anchor themselves to the intestinal wall with barbed, sucker-lined heads called scolexes, and absorb nutrients through their skin. As long as you eat, they eat. It's like a baby. It's like a one-sided relationship with a terrifying endurance. These worms are made of repeating segments called pronglotids, each one filled with reproductive organs. A mature tapeworm sheds hundreds or thousands of these egg-filled segments, which exit the host bodies with the poo. The script says feces, but I wanted to say poo because it's funny. If the eggs are eaten by a suitable intermediate host, say a cow or a pig, then they hatch into larvae, burrow into the tissue, and form cysts. When humans eat undercooked meat from an infected animal, the cycle completes. The larvae worm is woken up in the gut and they grow into adults. This result is a condition called teniasis. Now, most of the time, teniasis is surprisingly quiet. Some people experience abdominal discomfort, nausea, or weight loss, and others don't feel anything at all, until one day they notice something squirming in their poo-poo. That's very gross. It's kind of alien, and in many cases, it's manageable with anti-parasitic medication. But sometimes, this can go horribly wrong. Now, we're going to talk about what happens when a tapeworm goes to your brain. It's called neurocysteriasis. Cysteriasis, I think is probably how you'd say it. Neurocysteriasis, let's call it that. That sounds right. In its larval form, the pork tapeworm doesn't just wait patiently in pigs. If its eggs are ingested by a human instead of a pig, the body mistakenly plays the role of the intermediate host. The tapeworm doesn't grow in the intestines. Instead, the larvae hatch inside of you, entering the bloodstream. And they migrate often to the muscles, eyes, spine, or brain. They settle in and they form cysts. This is called cysteriasis. And when it reaches the central nervous system, it becomes neurocysteriasis, a devastating, often deadly condition. These cysts may remain silent for years, hiding like a ticking time bomb. But when they die, either naturally or from treatment, the immune system reacts with fury. The inflammation that follows can cause epileptic seizures, severe headaches, hydrocephalus. Something to do with that. Confusion and even death. In some parts of the world, particularly in Latin America, India, and sub-Saharan Africa, neurocysticercosis is a leading cause of adult onset epilepsy. And it's not just a tropical disease. With increasing global migration and travel, cases have been documented across the United States, Europe, and Australia. And here's the actual kicker. You don't actually need to eat pork to get this. Sorry, Jews. Sorry, Muslims. Have you noticed that those guys both don't eat pork? Maybe they should talk about that. You just solved the problem in the Middle East, boys. They don't eat pigs. We don't eat pigs. Damn it, that's a Tim Minchin song. I stole that. I thought it was really clever for a second. Anyway, even if you are kosher, it's not going to help because you don't need to eat the pork to get this disease. You just need to ingest microscopic eggs, often from water, food, or surfaces contaminated by human feces. Now, in some cases, people have infected themselves by poor hygiene after harboring a tapeworm in their own gut. Diagnosis requires brain imaging, CT scans or MRIs, and blood tests, but the symptoms often mimic other neurological conditions. The treatment for this is complex. Anti-parasitic drugs like albendazole and praziquantel can help, but they must be paired with steroids to blunt the immune response. In some cases, surgical removal of the cysts is the only true option, but not all cysts are operable. Some remain embedded in delicate or inaccessible brain regions. Some rupture, some calcify, and some kill. Now, tapeworms have long been seen as low-tier parasites. They're gross, but they're manageable. Almost comically simple in their quiet theft of calories. But they don't just steal your nutrients. Under the right conditions, it can steal your brain. So the next time someone jokes about eating for two, just remember, the tapeworm doesn't actually want your food. It just wants a home. We're also going to talk about one more now called, now this is a hard one to pronounce, Ascaris lumbricoides. Yes, Ascaris lumbricoides is a giant roundworm infecting perhaps 1 billion people globally. Eggs swallowed from dirty soil leads to larvae through the lungs and into the intestines. Massive infections can trigger bowel obstruction, malnutrition, respiratory issues, and even death. Hookworms. You've probably heard of these as well. Hookworm larvae penetrate bare skin, usually the feet, and then travel via blood to lungs and throat before reaching the gut. They drain the blood, causing anemia, developing delays in children, and even heart and liver damage. Still a scourge in warm and poor regions, especially where people don't wear their shoes, like at the beach or the park, for example. We also have lymphatic filariasis, which is transmitted by mosquitoes. These thread-like worms clog the lymphatic vessels over the years, causing extreme swelling, elephantitis, disfiguration, and disabling millions. Of all the human parasites, this one might be the most classic, and it's the most unsettling to its sheer scale. This intestinal roundworm doesn't go stealth. It actually grows large, reproducing freely, and can number in the dozens within the first single human host. Fully grown, they can reach 30 to 40 centimeters in length, which is long enough to stretch from your wrist to your shoulder, coiled around your small intestine. The infection starts, as many parasitic stories do, with a mouthful of contaminated food or water. Their eggs are microscopic and resilient, shedding in the feces of infected individuals, and often present in environments with poor sanitation. Once swallowed, the eggs don't hatch in the snail's in the small intestine. They release larvae that don't stay put. They burrow through the intestinal wall, entering the bloodstream, and they head for the lungs. There they mature further. Then, in a move that's both poetic and fucking disgusting, they can crawl up your windpipe, triggering a cough reflex that sends them into the mouth, where they are swallowed again and finally return to the intestines to reach adulthood. It's similar to the rat lungworm. It's a full body loop, equal parts science and horror. Now, in low numbers, Ascaris can be symptomless, but in heavier infections, the worms twist together in great pale knots, blocking the intestines or crawling up into the stomach and throat. Children are especially vulnerable. Many suffer from malnutrition, stunted growth, and persistent belly pain. In rare cases, the worm can actually exit through the nose or the mouth, which is a real nightmare. That I'm sorry that I've told you that exists. I'm very, very sorry. In parts of the world where sanitation is poor and children play barefoot in the dirt, this parasite remains a common and grotesque childhood companion. A worm that doesn't just live in you, but takes over your digestive tract like a slowly writhing invasion force. Now, we've talked about a lot of really gross things today, but it's important. I'll tell you why this matters. The horror of parasites, it lies not just in their biology, but in how they spread. In polluted water, in raw food, soil contact, insect bites, or interaction with animal hosts. Many victims are asymptomatic until irreversible damage arises, and yet these worms continue to devastate the most vulnerable, children, rural poor people, or travelers who don't take precautions. Now, there's some ways that you can avoid these disgusting little critters. Prevent, detect, and treat. Clean water, meat that is thoroughly cooked, and hygiene, including hand washing, are the front lines of defenses. You should always avoid swimming or washing in unknown fresh water, especially where schistosomiasis and snails are common. Beware raw snails, crustaceans, or berries on the forest floor. And of course, there's a bunch of medical treatments that you can use that are tailored to the specific species and infection. Neutral infections may require months of care and monitoring. Early detection here is vital. We often, on this podcast, imagine man-eaters as terrifying giants, like tigers or leopards, awful creatures of the night, like wolves. But really, when we talk about animals that cause us harm, few are as insidious as parasitic worms that live inside us. These are silent, unassuming, and their actions are hidden yet catastrophic. From the guinea worm's painful, slow emergence to a tapeworm's cyst-triggering seizures to brain-eating raccoon or rat worms, these parasites remind us that our own bodies can be a battleground. It's important to always stay alert, stay informed, because in the shadows, and sometimes in your poo-poo, some of the deadliest beings are there, almost invisible. So the northern part of Australia, I'm talking like far north Queensland, the Northern Territory, that's what is colloquially known in Australia as the top end. We refer to it as the top end. And it's a beautiful place. I've been there once, and I'd love to go there again. And if you ever get the chance to visit Australia, I would recommend the top end as a definite place to go. It's like the outback. It is untamed Australia. It's crazy. But when you picture it, you're probably picturing a relatively dry, desert-ish kind of environment. And that's not always the case. Because when the rains hit Australia's top end, it can really transform the entire landscape. So Kakadu National Park is the area that we're talking about today. And in the wet season, Kakadu is drowned in floodwaters. Rivers burst their banks, forests vanish under brown currents, and the land becomes a labyrinth of hidden channels. It's breathtaking, but it's also extremely dangerous because this land belongs to crocodiles. Now, this is the story of a woman who learned that lesson the hardest way possible. Val Plumwood, an environmental philosopher, feminist, thinker, writer, and a rebel. She went out for what she thought was just a simple canoe trip in 1985, but she came back with her body shredded, her bones exposed, and her worldview forever transformed. But Val's attack is just one chapter in a much larger book of blood. Because crocodiles have been killing, and in a lot of cases eating, people for as long as humans have dared to set foot near their waters. Today, we're diving into the world of the saltwater crocodile, the biology, the brutality, and the body count. But let's step back for a moment and talk about our main character of this story, Val Plumwood. Who was she, and what carried her to that canoe on that day? Well, Val was born Val Morrell in 1939 in rural New South Wales. Her childhood wasn't privileged, her family struggled, money was tight, and from very early on she developed a rebellious streak. She never accepted the idea that the world had to be taken as it was. And this stubbornness shaped her whole life. Now, Val was incredibly smart. She was a voracious reader, and by the 1960s, she was breaking into the male-dominated world of philosophy. She carved out a place for herself with ideas that challenged the human-centric view of the world. She argued that nature wasn't just something out there for us to dominate, but something to be part of, to be bound up in, and to be dependent on. She was also a feminist and a deep ecologist. She was an activist, and maybe most importantly, she was a questioner. And that questioning took her into the wilderness again and again and again. She lived in a stone house built by hand in the bush just outside Canberra, and she loved being close to the wild. She really did believe that being in the wild sharpened your sense of reality. So in February of 1985, when she set off into Kakadu National Park, she wasn't just some naive tourist. She was absolutely a seasoned outdoorswoman. She knew what it meant to be in wild places. But knowledge and preparation can only take you so far when you're stepping into croc country. Now, as mentioned before, Kakadu in the wet season, it's like a completely different world. If you've only ever seen it in the dry, with its, big red cliffs and billabongs, you'd barely recognize it. Because in the wet season, the monsoon rains pour down day after day. The rivers swell until they burst their banks, and the floodplains merge into vast inland seas. The forest floor drowns under brown, rushing water. And the air is heavy. It's thick with the smell of mud, plant life breathing, and humidity. Mosquitoes rise in black clouds. The calls of birds echo strangely through the soaked canopy. And always, you feel the presence of water. It pushes in from every side, turning paths into channels, channels into rivers. And this is the season where crocodiles thrive. These animals thrive all year round, but the wet season is where they truly kill it. For them, the floods are a gift. It means that they can move anywhere. They can slide through drowned forests, they can vanish under the surface, and they can turn up when you least expect them. Now, the locals in Kakadu know this, and the indigenous people of the region have understood it, that the wet season belongs to the crocs, so you better tread carefully, or you're not going to be treading at all. But on this day, Val Plumwood was on a mission. She had set out in a borrowed green fiberglass canoe, planning to paddle across a channel and pick up a walking stick. Simple enough, yeah? But when the landscape itself is transformed into a maze of flooded trees, simple evaporates very fast. She paddled under a canoe of paperbark trees, the rain spitting down in silver sheets, her canoe rocking on the swollen current. All around her, the forest looked drowned and endless, every tree trunk mirrored in the brown water. Landmarks vanished, directions become unreliable. She was deep in the thick of it, and quite soon, she was a little bit lost. Hours passed, and she pushed deeper and deeper into the channels looking for a way out, trying to reorient herself. She then stopped at one point on a rocky outcrop, climbed out of her canoe, and ate a soggy sandwich in the rain. And while she was sitting there, dripping wet, eating her soggy sanger, something stirred at the edge of her mind. A prickling sensation that you get sometimes when you feel like you're being watched. Now, Val, she sort of brushed this off. She thought it might just be the nerves of being alone in a storm-drenched wilderness. But she climbed back in her canoe and pushed on. And that's when she saw it. I'm going to read you a quote now that Val wrote. She said, "When I pulled over my canoe in the driving rain to a rock outcrop rising out of the swamp for a hasty, sodden lunch, I experienced the unfamiliar sensation of being watched. Having never been one for timidity in the philosophy or in real life, I decided rather than to return defeated to my sticky caravan to explore a clear, deeper channel to the river I had traveled along the previous day. I had not gone more than 5 or 10 meters down the channel when rounding a bend, I saw ahead of me in midstream what looked like a floating stick. One I did not recall passing on my way up. As the current moved me towards it, the stick appeared to develop eyes." That's right. Around the bend in the channel, half submerged in the water, lay what anyone could have viewed as just a simple log. Still, dark and harmless. Just another piece of the flooded forest. I think I'm having an issue with my sound. Can you hear that? Hopefully that's... That's the problem with live recording, guys. Okay, hopefully that's fine. Anyway, this is Kakadu in the wet season. And in crocodile country, sometimes logs have eyes. That's because that log that Val Plumwood spotted on that day was not a log at all. It was a saltwater crocodile. And not just any croc. This was an apex predator. An animal that had been perfecting its killing craft since before humans even existed on this planet. Now let's take a moment here, let's pause, and let's talk about saltwater crocodiles, because to understand the terror that Val was about to face, you really need to understand what she was up against. You know what a crocodile looks like, but let's go a little bit deeper. So these animals, they're living relics of the dinosaur age. And I know that phrase gets thrown around a lot when we talk about animals, you know, they're just living dinosaurs. I want you to really think about what that means. These animals were around with the dinosaurs. They're not dinosaurs themselves, but they were with them. And that's how long they have been on this planet, evolving to become apex predators. Their ancestors prowled prehistoric swamps while the T-Rex still roared across the continents. And in all that time, over 200 million years, crocodiles have actually barely changed. And why do you think that is? Why haven't they changed? It's because they don't need to. Because their design is already perfect. A saltwater crocodile can grow over 6 meters long and can weigh more than a small car. Its body is armored in thick scales, and its jaws are lined with conical teeth designed not for chewing, but for grabbing and holding. And once these jaws snap shut, there's no muscle in the world strong enough to pry them open. Their bite force is the most powerful of any animal on the planet, measured at over 37 pounds per square inch. That's enough to crush bones like chalk. And I've seen videos of them do that. They throw like a pig skull at the thing. It crumbles under the pressure of these teeth. Now, salties are ambush predators. They don't stalk their prey with dramatic charges. They wait. They wait hours. Sometimes they wait days without moving a muscle, just drifting with the current looking like debris, and their eyes and nostrils just breaking out of the surface. These animals are masters of patience. When the time is right, they strike, lightning fast. And despite their huge size, they can launch from the water with explosive power, hitting their target before the prey even registers the danger. And then comes one of the most famous wrestling moves in the entire animal kingdom, the death roll. The infamous bone-snapping spin designed to drag animals underwater, to tear their flesh apart, and to drown whatever is still alive. Now, Kakadu National Park in the wet season is prime hunting ground for these animals. Fish swarm through the flooded channels. Wallabies, snakes, feral pigs, and even buffalo can get stranded in the water. And every so often, so does a human. And here's the really special thing about saltwater crocodiles. They don't view human beings as anything special, okay? To them, we're just another warm body. We're just meat wrapped in skin. We're a little bit slower and clumsier and maybe a little bit more annoying than the animals that they're used to dealing with. But they're not picky eaters. We're easy pickings. They will go for us. Now, like a tiger or a lion typically will avoid a human. A crocodile and a shark as well. Like, sharks don't like attacking you. Crocodiles absolutely see us as food. There's no difference to them between us or another animal. A crocodile, a kangaroo or a human, to a crocodile, it doesn't matter. We're just lunch, okay? So Val had actually been warned before this trip. In fact, park authorities had stressed, don't go into the channels in the wet season. But Val was confident, maybe a little bit overconfident, considering what happened. But it's not hard to see why she was confident. She'd spent years in the bush, and she was an experienced, and honestly, when you're sitting in a canoe, it's easy to forget what's underneath you. But as she paddled through the drowned forest, one of those ancient predators had already locked onto her. Now just imagine the crocodile's perspective here. The water is murky, but alive with vibration. And crocodiles don't need to see well to hunt. They can feel the world through nerves that are so sensitive they can detect the faintest ripple. Every paddle stroke Val made, every shift of the canoe that broadcasted her presence. She was like a drumbeat moving through the water. She was pretty impossible to miss. So the crocodile would have followed her silently, keeping its profile low, barely disturbing the surface of the water. It may have shadowed her for minutes or for hours, And that's the thing. When you're in croc country, you actually don't even know how long you've been watched. You don't know how long you've been their prey. You don't see them until they've decided that you're going to see them, and then that's too late. Your lunch. Now, there are stories from indigenous ranges that have been echoed in news reports around Kakadu of crocodiles shadowing fishing boats for miles, waiting for someone to lean over the side. There are records of people being snatched off riverbanks, dragged from campfires, even taken while bathing in shallow water. 1 second, everything feels safe, and the next, it's just teeth and darkness. And that is what Val was drifting towards. She was alone, in a flimsy fiberglass canoe, basically an eggshell against a monster that had survived the meteor that wiped out the dinosaurs. No weapons, no backpack, no escape route except the water itself. And in that water, a pair of glassy eyes had fixed onto her. The canoe drifted quietly along the flooded channel, its green fiberglass belly gliding over the water like a leaf. The rain had softened into a mist, drumming gently on the canopy overhead. For a moment, Val Plumwood felt something close to calm. She was still lost, yes, but she'd paddled out of tight spots before. She was determined, resourceful, and she believed that she would make it back. And then, without warning, the world suddenly exploded. From beneath the water, the crocodile launched upward like a missile. Its jaws clamped down on the side of her canoe with a sound like splitting timber. The fiberglass shrieked. The boat rocked violently, nearly capsizing, as the massive reptile thrashed and heaved, its teeth tearing grooves into the hull. Just imagine that moment. You're alone, lost. Your lifeline is the canoe beneath you, and suddenly that lifeline is being shredded by something with the power of a wrecking ball. Val's heart must have been hammering, her lungs seized with shock. She fought to steady the canoe, but the croc wasn't having it. Its head, the size of a suitcase, burst through the water, its eyes cold, its teeth glistening with river slime. For a split second, their gazes met, and she realized the truth. This wasn't just a territorial display or a mistake. This wasn't a warning. It was a hunt. The crocodile came again, slamming its body into the canoe. The fiberglass cracked. Val was thrown off balance, and then it struck with precision. It lunged up, its jaws wide, and it clamped directly onto her leg. The pain she felt was instant and blinding. Teeth like knives punctured through the muscle, tearing skin in ragged gashes. Blood gushed into the brown floodwater. She screamed, the sound swallowed by the forest. And before she could even process the agony, the crocodile did what a crocodile does best. It began the death roll. The world spun into chaos. She was wrenched from the canoe and dragged under the water. The spin was violent, bone-jarring. Her body twisted like a rag doll in the grip of something far stronger than her. Every rotation drove teeth deeper, shredded tissue, and filled her mouth and lungs with foul, muddy water. This is how crocodiles kill. They don't just bite. They disorient, they drown, and they shred. The death roll is designed to snap bones, spines, rip limbs, tear chunks of flesh free. Survivors of crocodile attacks describe it as being like in a washing machine full of knives. And that's what Val was experiencing. She was in that washing machine full of knives. Except she had no certainty that she'd ever surface again. But Val was a fighter. She had been her whole life. And through sheer will, she twisted, kicked, and somehow managed to wrench herself free. Maybe the crocodile's grip slipped on its own, with, bloody flesh slipping from its teeth. Maybe it was responsible for nearly trying to get a better hold. Whatever the reason, she shot to the surface and she gasped for air, coughing water from her lungs. But she had no time to breathe again. The crocodile surged once more, jaws slamming into her thigh. Another eruption of agony, another roll. She was dragged down, the water turning red around her. Her body was battered against roots, rocks, and branches. She fought. She clawed at the monster's armored head, struck out wildly in blind panic, and somehow, once again, she managed to slip free. This second escape might have felt like a miracle. She burst back into the air, the rain cold on her face, her lungs screaming for oxygen. She clawed her way to a half-submerged log, clinging desperately and hoping that that sunken log was not another crocodile. The forest spun around her in dizzying confusion. But the crocodile wasn't finished. It came at her a third time, a final, ferocious strike. Its jaws seized her across the hip, crushing her bones and ripping more flesh. The roll began again, this time slower, more methodical, like the animal was certain that the fight was over. She felt herself being pulled deeper into the darkness, her body breaking and her blood clouding the water. And here's where the story takes a horrifying tangent, because this isn't a unique tactic. Saltwater crocodiles have killed people like this countless times. In 1985, the same year as Val's attack, a young man camping near Darwin went to wash his hands in a billabong. A croc lunged, seizing him by the torso, and rolled him under. His friends described the water turning red, his body disappearing in seconds, never to be seen again. In 2014 in Kakadu, a 12-year-old boy was taken while swimming. His body was found 4 days later, torn apart. And for the most part, for most victims, that third strike would be the end. There's no escape here. There's only silence, broken by the snap of jaws and the churn of water. But somehow, we don't know how, Val Plumwood broke free again. It's the power of ecofeminism, everyone. She surfaced a final time, coughing blood, half drowned, her body shredded, her leg and hip hanging in ribbons of flesh. The croc, perhaps momentarily confused, sank back into the depths. Maybe it thought she was finished already. Maybe it was just planning to return. But Val, with the last of her strength, dragged herself towards a tree trunk rising from the floodwaters. She clung to it, bleeding, gasping, her vision darkening. She was still alive, but barely, and she knew that the crocodile was still out there, waiting for her. This ordeal wasn't over, not by a long shot. Val Plumwood clung to the tree trunk, blood streaming from her wounds, her heart hammering so violently she could feel it rattling in her chest. The water around her was dark, and dark with her own blood, swirling in lazy crimson eddies. In crocodile country, this is the last place you would want to be, bleeding into the water, basically signaling to every predator in the area that dinner is ready. She knew that she couldn't stay there. If the crocodile came back, she had no doubt it would. She would be finished. But the alternative was just as terrifying. To leave the tree, she had to climb back into the water. And this is where survival comes down to not strength, but wits. Most people, in the face of an attack like this, they don't make it. Not necessarily because their bodies fail, but because their minds surrender. They let panic take over, and they freeze up. They just surrender. They give up. But Val Plumwood was not going to surrender. She had something still inside her. It was that stubbornness that she'd had through her whole life, a refusal to yield. And that had carried her through every fight of her life. She wasn't going to die floating in that swamp, not if she had a shred of a chance. So, she let go. Her body was decimated. Her thigh was torn open in a wound so deep you could see the pale flashes of bone. Her hip was entirely mangled, muscle and sinew stripped and dangling. Every movement sent waves of searing pain through her body. Blood poured profusely, slicking her skin, soaking the water, and yet somehow she forced herself forward. She swam. And it wasn't graceful. It wasn't fast, but it didn't need to be. It was a desperate, weak strokes, one arm at a time, kicking one leg, coughing water from lungs that had already nearly drowned. Behind her, every ripple felt like it could be the crocodile rising again, jaws opening, ready to finish what it had started. She half expected at any second to feel those teeth close over her spine. The forest seemed endless. The waterlogged trees stretched on and on and on, each one looking like salvation but offering no easy escape. She clung to branches, pulled herself along, slid across mats of vegetation, dragging her broken body inch by inch towards higher ground. And here's where we have to stop and consider, how the fuck does someone survive this? How does someone survive having lost this much blood? By all rights, Val Plumwood should have been dead already. The human body can only carry about 5 liters of blood, and by the descriptions of her wounds, she must have lost a horrifying amount of that. Yet adrenaline, the body's last-ditch chemical miracle, kept her going. Adrenaline floods the system in moments of mortal danger, numbing pain, sharpening focus, and forcing muscles to work beyond exhaustion. It is the difference between collapsing and crawling. There are parallels here with other attacks as well. Take, for example, the 2018 case of a spear fisherman in Queensland who was mauled by a saltwater crocodile. His arm was nearly severed, bones were shattered, and his flesh was left dangling, yet he managed to swim back to shore before collapsing. Or take stories of shark attack survivors who, with limbs missing, still managed to swim through their own blood trails to safety. It's a grim reminder here that the human body is terrifying in what it can achieve when it's cornered. Back in Kakadu, okay, Val pulled herself out of the water at last. She found a patch of mud and grass just above the floodline and collapsed. The world was spinning. Her vision darkened at the edges. She was dizzy from blood loss. She was trembling and barely able to breathe. And that's when the hallucinations started. Later, she would describe this moment in almost mystical terms. She felt herself slipping into a dreamlike state, the forest fading, her body floating above the pain. Some part of her mind whispered that it would be okay to just stop, just to let go, to sink back into the darkness. But another part of her, the philosopher, the fighter, the woman who had built her own stone home with her bare hands, well, that part refused. She clung on to consciousness with the same stubbornness that she had clung onto that tree trunk. She was not going to die like this. Slowly, agonizingly, she began to crawl. Just picture this for a moment. A woman, alone, torn open, blood caked down her legs, dragging her broken body through the mud like a wounded animal. Every handful of earth she clawed forward was a victory. Every tree root she pulled herself over was a mountain. The wet season forest closed in around her, steaming, buzzing with insects, the smell of wet earth and blood thick in the air. And she wasn't even safe yet. Crocodiles are patient hunters, guys. There was every chance that the same croc or another one was still shadowing her from the water, waiting for her to collapse within reach. But she kept crawling. Minutes stretched into hours, maybe more. Her strength ebbed. Her blood loss was catastrophic. She was dizzy, nauseated, and fading. But some sliver of will still carried her forward. Finally, she stumbled upon help. 2 rangers out in the park found her near collapse. They saw a woman who looked like she had been fed through a meat grinder, lacerations crisscrossing her body, flesh peeled away from her thigh, her hip pulped into ruin. Even then, she was still lucky. The rangers managed to act fast. They stabilized her, got her onto a stretcher, and evacuated her by helicopter. She was rushed to Darwin Hospital, where surgeons fought to piece her back together. The wounds were catastrophic. Muscle was stripped away, nerves were severed, and infection was already starting to take hold. But Val Plumwood survived. If anything's worth a clapping sound effect, it's that. Now, the survival wasn't the end of her story. Val Plumwood would spend months recovering, enduring multiple surgeries, battling infection, and rebuilding her strength. The scars were permanent. The pain was going to be permanent as well. But so too was her determination to make sense of what happened, and not just for herself, but for the world. Because for Val, the attack wasn't just an accident, and it wasn't just bad luck either. It was a confrontation with something that she had spent her entire life thinking about. The idea that humans are not separate from nature. We are not untouchable. We're not above the food chain. We're still in there. Out there, in the swamp, she had just become another animal. She was just another meal. Like the sandwich, the soggy sandwich that she ate on the rock, she was that crocodile sandwich. Val Plumwood survived, and that in itself is remarkable. But surviving was only the beginning of a journey that would test her mind as brutally as the crocodile had tested her body. In the weeks and months following the attack, she endured a series of surgeries. She had skin grafts covering shredded flesh. Doctors worked to repair torn muscle and damaged nerves. And infections were a common threat. Melendiosis, a tropical bacterial disease common in wet season floodwaters, took hold in some of her wounds. Every movement, every attempt to walk caused her agony that radiated from her torn leg to her hip, a constant reminder that her encounter with a crocodile had not released her. It had just reshaped her very body. And yet, as her body healed, Val's mind churned with questions far beyond her personal suffering. She wrote extensively about what had happened, Not in a sensationalist way like I often do on my show, but more in a philosophical, almost poetic language. She refused to frame herself as purely a victim. Instead, she examined the experience as a profound lesson in vulnerability and humanity, in the reality of being prey. Now, that's actually the title of her essay, Being Prey, and this essay is a meditation on that experience. She describes the attack as a moment of brutal clarity, a confrontation with the raw truth of existence. In those seconds underwater, spun around by the crocodile's death roll, she writes, she was stripped of all pretense, all human exceptionalism. She was, quote, meat, like any other creature. And it was this understanding that reoriented her philosophy. Val's reflections stretch beyond her own survival. She questions a cultural arrogance, a belief that humans exist outside nature and are untouchable by its laws. Val says, we are not always the predator. Sometimes we are simply the prey. This idea resonates beyond Kakadu and beyond Australia, beyond crocodiles. It applies to sharks, bears, and all other apex predators that we cover on this show. It applies to the way that humans approach the natural world with hubris, building settlements on floodplains and swimming in waters that we barely know, and just assuming that the nature will bend to our will. Her story also intersects with countless other attacks in Australian history. Let's take the 2013 death of Sean Cole in the Mary River. He'd been swimming in darkness, ignoring warnings, when a saltwater crocodile seized him and dragged him under. Or in 2021, there was an attack on Andrew Heard near Townsville, where two crocodiles coordinated in an almost unprecedented display of predatory behaviour. Now, unlike Val, these victims did not escape, highlighting just how narrow the line between survival and death truly is in croc country. And yet, even in the face of such horror, Val emerged with a sense of awe. She described a gratitude for the experience, a recognition of the crocodile's role in the ecosystem. This was a creature that had been shaped over millions of years, perfectly adapted to its environment. It had just followed its instinct. It was hunting effectively and executed the only strategy it knew. In that sense, Val wrote, it was neither cruel nor evil, it just simply was. This perspective, remarkable for someone who had endured such trauma, underscores the depth of her philosophical thinking. Because for Val, the attack wasn't just about survival, it was about understanding her place in the world, the fragility of a human life, and the necessity of humility in the faces of forces that are far older and more powerful than us. There's also a practical side to this reflection too. Val became an advocate, in subtle ways, for respecting wildlife and understanding danger. Her story was a cautionary one. The floods of Kakadu, the hidden rivers, the camouflage of a crocodile on the surface, these are not just anomalies. That's just nature behaving exactly as it's supposed to. Humans must respect that reality or pay the ultimate price. Her experience continues to inform how we think about predator-prey relationships today. Researchers studying crocodile attacks often cite Val's case as one of the rare instances of survival under extraordinary circumstances, and as a touchstone for understanding more of the behavior of saltwater crocodiles and the mindset required to survive an attack. In a broader sense, Val's ordeal blurs the lines between philosophy and survival. She writes not only about the physical terror, but also about the psychological transformation that comes from confronting your own mortality so directly. Becoming prey, she concluded, teaches lessons that are impossible to learn from a classroom or from a book. You cannot understand vulnerability until something like this has held you in its jaws, rolled you around like a rag doll, and left you barely clinging to life. Her story resonates so hard because it's so unique and also so universal. It's unique because very few people could possibly survive what she survived. It's universal because all humans in one way or another are prey. We're prey to illness, to misfortune, to forces greater than ourselves, and sometimes, yes, prey to other animals. Her encounter with the crocodile became a vivid metaphor for this fundamental truth. And so when we retell Val Plumwood's story, when we trace the waterlogged channels of Kakadu and imagine the jaws of that ancient predator snapping around her leg, we are reminded of something truly profound. Fear is natural. respect is necessary, survival is fragile, and sometimes the deepest lessons in life come not from triumph, but from the narrowest escape from death itself. Val Plumwood's story is extraordinary, but she's far from the only human to have come face to face with these prehistoric hunters. Australia has long been the hunting ground of the saltwater crocodile, and the history of attacks is harrowing and instructive. For example, we mentioned Sean Murray, the 24-year-old in 2013, who went swimming in the Mary River in Queensland. And despite local warnings that a massive 5-metre saltwater crocodile had been spotted, Sean still waded into the water at night. In seconds, the predator seized him, dragging him under before witnesses could intervene. His body was recovered days later, showing the devastation and effectiveness of the crocodile attack. Flesh torn, limbs battered, and a pattern of injuries consistent with multiple death rolls. Unlike Val, Sean had no tree to cling onto, no luck to pull him out of the jaws of death, and his fate reminds us how thin the line is between life and death. And then, of course, there's the 69-year-old retiring fisher, Andrew Hurd, who was attacked in 2021 in Townsville. When he disappeared while tending to his dinghy along a small estuary, rescuers found the boat, and it was mangled and bloodied. Later, investigators concluded that Andrew had fallen victim to not one, but 2 crocodiles, and reports actually suggested that a large male and a smaller female were working in tandem, which rarely happens in the wild with crocodiles. These animals had then torn him apart before he could reach safety. The water was littered with debris, including clothing, splashes of blood, bone, and human meat. It was a gruesome testament to the croc's predatory intelligence. There are countless other cases. We've mentioned a few of them. The 1985 attack on a man near Darwin who wandered too close to a riverbank, and within moments he was dragged into the water by a crocodile. Body never recovered. The 2014 death of a 12-year-old boy playing near Kakadu, well, he was snatched in broad daylight, and eyewitnesses reported the child was taken within seconds. What makes these attacks particularly terrifying, and what Val experienced herself, was the sheer stealth and patience of a saltwater crocodile. They rarely chase prey for long distances. Instead, they choose to ambush. They sense vibrations in the water, detecting heat, and can remain completely submerged for up to an hour while waiting. The camouflage of a crocodile is nearly perfect as well. Their scaly backs break the surface like floating logs, and their stillness makes them almost invisible. For anyone wading, swimming, or boating in the water, a crocodile can appear in seconds without warning. There's also the gruesome efficiency of their killing method. Once a crocodile clamps down its jaws, it begins the death roll, which is a terrifyingly precise maneuver. Survivors have described spinning while being thrown against rocks, roots, and vegetation, while teeth tear through muscles and sinew. If the predator's grip fails, it will readjust, reposition, and repeat. The attack often ends with a drowning, as the crocodile often breaks the victim or the animal's legs or arms, meaning it's unable to swim to the surface. Of course, flesh and bone are also torn in ragged ribbons, and the water is clouded with blood and sediment, making it impossible to see. Val survived these odds, but most people don't. Even more chilling are the cooperation or unusual attacks. Saltwater crocodiles are usually solitary hunters, but there are documented cases of 2 working in tandem, such as in Andrew Hurd's case. And in some regions, crocodiles have been known to ambush groups of people, particularly when the prey congregates along the banks. The water hides them, the currents conceal them, and they can strike with a power and precision that seems almost surgical. And yet, beyond the gore and the terror, these stories, of course, are cautionary tales. They reveal not only the physical strength of the crocodiles, but their evolutionary perfection. Saltwater crocodiles have survived on this planet for over 4 million years. It's a lot longer than that. Millions and millions of years, because they are effective, patient, and adaptable. They are apex predators. They are the best example of an apex predator, I think, perfectly tuned to their environment. And they can take human arrogance as little seriously as a cat notices a mouse. For Val Plumwood, these other stories would have served as grim reminders that her survival was extraordinary, but it was also fragile. She was lucky. She was kind of prepared as well. She knew what she was getting into. And she had a singular combination of physical strength, willpower, and presence of mind. For every Val, however, there are dozens or hundreds of people who are not as fortunate. Val's story, set against the backdrop of these other attacks, highlights a terrifying reality for Northern Australia. In these Northern Australian waterways, crocodiles are not just legends. They're not mythological creatures or fables, and they're not something you can just outsmart with caution alone. These are living, breathing, perfectly adapted predators, patient and deadly. And sometimes, in an instant, they can remind humans we are not the masters of this land. To the crocodiles of the north, we're just meat. The Red Sea has always held a strange kind of magnetism. It's one of the warmest seas in the world, bordered by endless stretches of desert and home to coral gardens that seem almost impossible to be alive. Glowing reefs, clouds of fish, and clear blue visibility that can stretch over 30 meters. To divers, it's an absolute paradise, and to scientists, it's one of the most unique and isolated marine ecosystems on the planet. And to Egypt, it's a cornerstone of their tourism industry, a rare meeting point of natural beauty and commercial necessity. At the southern tip of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula sits Sharm el-Sheikh, a name that for decades was synonymous with luxury and safety. Once a small Bedouin fishing village, it was transformed in the 1980s and 1990s into a booming resort hub. By the year 2010, Sharm was attracting nearly 1 million international tourists every year. Its beaches and coral reefs drew tourists from across Europe and Russia. The area's tourism was so vital that it actually accounted for nearly 15% of Egypt's entire GDP. Now, the Red Sea coastline was tightly managed, designated swimming zones, strict diving regulations, and an entire industry built on the promise that this was a place where the ocean could be admired without risk. Local guides would remind visitors that shark attacks were almost unheard of here. In fact, before 2010, there had only been a handful of recorded shark incidents in the Egyptian Red Sea across several decades. The waters of Sharm were considered calm, predictable, and by global standards, remarkably safe. So, when a first attack occurred in November of 2010, it was treated as a tragic anomaly. When a second attack happened the very next day, it became something else entirely. Over the course of a single week, 5 tourists were attacked by sharks on the same stretch of coastline. 4 were left grievously injured and 1 was killed. And for a brief, chaotic moment, one of the world's most idyllic holiday destinations became the center of a global mystery. Marine scientists, environmentalists, and government officials raced to find answers. Tourists fled, beaches were emptied, and beneath the surface, something had changed. Something that would challenge long-held assumptions about shark behavior and human impact on the ocean. Now, what caused these attacks? Why did they happen in such rapid succession, and could they have been prevented? Today, we're investigating the 2010 Sharm el-Sheikh shark attacks, a rare and chilling case where a resort built on harmony with the sea suddenly came face to face with its most dangerous inhabitants. Now, to understand what happened in Sharm el-Sheikh in 2010, it helps to understand where it happened and what made this place so unique. Sharm sits at the crossroads of continents. To the west, Africa, Asia to the east, on a narrow triangle of desert known as the Sinai Peninsula. The town looks out over the Gulf of Aguapa, one of the 2 long inlets that form the northern tips of the Red Sea. From above, the coastline looks like a delicate fracture between continents, pale gold cliffs meeting deep, impossibly blue water. And you might know a little bit about the Red Sea. The Red Sea itself is unlike almost any other body of water on the planet. It's semi-enclosed, bordered by Egypt, Sudan, and Eritrea to the west, and Saudi Arabia and Yemen to the east. There are no large rivers feeding into it and very little rain. As a result, its salinity is extremely high. Evaporation rates are intense, which means that the water is warm, clear, and unusually dense. It's also one of the most isolated marine environments on the planet. The isolation has created a distinct ecosystem, hundreds of species found nowhere else, from bright Athenis fish to hammerhead sharks and oceanic whitetips. For decades, marine scientists have studied the Red Sea as a model of resilience, an ocean thriving under extreme conditions. But by 2010, that resilience was being tested. Climate change was already beginning to warm the waters. Overfishing in nearby regions was depleting food sources, and the sheer growth of tourism, particularly along the Sinai coast, was putting increased pressure on coral reefs and local wildlife. The waters off Sharm el-Sheikh are deceptively deep. Just a few hundred meters from shore, the seabed drops sharply into the abyssal trench and runs the length of the Gulf of Aguapa over 1,800 meters deep in some places. It's like a vertical highway for marine life, where deep water predators can move close to shore with very little effort. For divers, that topography makes Sharm a dream destination. You've got vibrant reefs on one side and open blue water on the other. But what it also means is that the boundary between human and predator is much thinner than in other oceans. By 2010, there were about 150 hotels in Sharm and the surrounding areas. The town's population swelled from roughly 35,000 residents to well over 100,000 residents during peak tourist seasons. Now, most of these visitors were European, mainly from Russia, Germany, and Italy, drawn by the promise of warm water, reliable sunshine, and the chance to swim amongst wild reef fish. Every day, hundreds of tourists entered the sea. Snorkelers floated above the coral gardens, cruise boats ferried divers to offshore reefs, and operators threw scraps of food into the water to attract fish for photos. A common but environmentally risky practice known as chumming. By 2010, this kind of feeding activity was officially banned, but in practice it still occurred, especially in areas frequented by unlicensed guides. To locals, sharks were almost a part of the background. They were rarely seen and they were virtually never feared. Occasionally, a dive instructor might glimpse a reef shark or a passing white tip in deeper water, but serious incidents were virtually unheard of here. In the 5 decades leading up to 2010, Egypt's entire Red Sea coastline recorded fewer than a dozen confirmed shark attacks. Statistically, a visitor was more likely to be injured by slipping on a pool deck than by encountering a shark. And that sense of security actually became part of the region's identity. Sharm el-Sheikh was marketed not as an adventure destination, but as a place of safety, a tamed wilderness where nature was beautiful, photogenic, and entirely under control. And if you've been listening to this show for long enough, you would understand that this thinking is particularly folly. It is impossible to tame nature, and the residents of Sharm el-Sheikh are about to find that out. Now, when the first attack occurred at the end of November 2010, it didn't just shock the tourists, it shocked the people who lived there and worked there. The guides, the divers, the lifeguards who had spent their entire lives in these waters and believed that they understood them. For the first time in living memory, the boundary between the tourist and the predator had been breached. And the question that everyone was asking now was, why here and why now? The first attack occurred on the morning of November 30th, 2010. The water was calm and clear, typical for that time of year. Air temperatures hovered in the high 20s, and visibility beneath the surface stretched for nearly 20 meters. A 70-year-old Russian woman named Ludmila Sturyova entered the water for a morning swim just off Nama Bay, one of Sharm el-Sheikh's most popular beaches. It was a routine activity, the same stretch of sea that hundreds of tourists had entered every day and was watched over by lifeguards lined with resort pontoons. Within minutes, witnesses saw a thrashing. At first, many assumed she was in distress or had been caught in a current. Then came the unmistakable plume of red spreading across the water. Lifeguards and nearby swimmers pulled her ashore. She had suffered catastrophic injuries to one arm, which was partially severed. She rushed to the local hospital in stable condition, but the severity of her wounds shocked almost everyone who saw them. Officials closed the beach temporarily. Dive operators were told to suspend trips to nearby reefs. Most assumed it was a tragic accident, perhaps a single disoriented shark that had wandered too close to shore. The local authorities announced that the situation was being monitored and that there was no ongoing threat. Now, this reassurance lasted less than 24 hours. On December 1st, 2 more tourists, both Russians, were attacked within a short distance of the first site. The victims, Olga and Yevgeny Trishna, were snorkeling in shallow water when a shark struck. According to eyewitnesses, the water turned red almost instantly. One of the victims lost a leg below the knee, the other lost fingers on one of their hands. Now, both were rescued alive but were seriously injured. These were not glancing encounters or cases of mistaken identity where shark bites once and then retreats. The attacks were prolonged and deliberate, showing an unusual level of persistence. To marine experts, this behavior was deeply concerning. In less than 48 hours, 3 people had been mauled in a tightly confined section of the coastline, a pattern that almost never occurs in shark-human interactions. Globally, the vast majority of attacks are isolated events. A single individual might be bitten once, after which the shark disappears. Repeated assaults within the same small area suggest a behavioral shift, possibly hunger, stress, or habituation to human presence. By the afternoon of December 1st, panic had spread across Sharm el-Sheikh's resort strip. Guests were ordered out of the water. Helicopters and patrol boats began scanning the surface. The Egyptian Environmental Ministry dispatched a crisis response team, which included marine biologists and a local fisherman experienced with the animal's shark species. They quickly concluded that the likely culprits here were either an oceanic white-tip shark or possibly a short-fin mako shark. Both species had been sighted in the region, and both are known to be able to inflict the kind of injuries that were reported. The government authorized a shark hunt, an attempt to capture or kill the animals believed to be responsible. Within 2 days, fishermen caught and killed 2 large sharks, one of each species, in the waters near Sharm. Authorities photographed the carcasses, issued a statement declaring the danger over, and promptly reopened the beaches. And if this sounds familiar to you, it's because this is what happened in Jaws, almost word for word. For a few days, life appeared to return to normal. Tourists began to re-enter the water, reassured by official press releases and statements from local hotel associations. But amongst the diving community, the unease remained. Several instructors claimed that the captured sharks did not match the descriptions given by witnesses, particularly the distinctive white-tipped fins noted by survivors. Those concerns were largely dismissed. The priority for many in government and tourism was restoring confidence and the reopening of the Red Sea to visitors. Now, this decision, as I'm sure you can already imagine, would prove to be a mistake. Because just 4 days later, another attack occurred, and this time, the victim would not survive. In the early days after the December shark captures, the atmosphere in Sharm el-Sheikh shifted cautiously back to normality. By December 3rd, beaches were open again. Tourists began swimming and snorkeling, reassured by the government assurances that rogue sharks were responsible for the early incidents and had been neutralized. Helicopters had stopped their routine patrols, and lifeguards returned to routine observation. But beneath the surface, the real threat had not been removed. On the afternoon of December 5th, 2010, at a site called Ras Nasrani, roughly 6 kilometers north of Nama Bay, a 70-year-old German woman named Renette Kubusch entered the waters to snorkel along the reef. She was an experienced swimmer and had visited this region many times before, and the conditions were ideal. There were flat seas, clear skies, and calm visibility. Moments later, the people on shore heard screams. Swimmers nearby described seeing a large, dark shape circling beneath the surface before striking with tremendous force. Witnesses reported that the woman was pulled beneath the water twice before she can be brought back towards the beach. Rescuers dragged her onto the sand, but she had suffered massive trauma to her torso and limbs. Her left arm had been severed at the shoulder, and deep bite wounds marked her upper body. She died on the beach before medical assistance could arrive. The attack was witnessed by multiple people, including lifeguards, resort staff, and tourists. It was broad daylight, in shallow water, only meters from the shore. News of the fatality spread rapidly, first through Sharm's hotel network, then across Egypt, and then international media outlets. For locals, it was confirmation of what many had already feared. The sharks caught earlier that week were not the ones responsible. The Egyptian authorities immediately reinstated a full ban on swimming, snorkeling, and diving across all beaches in Sharm el-Sheikh and the neighboring resort areas. Security patrols were intensified. Boats were ordered to remain within sight of the coastline. The incident was declared a national emergency, and Egypt's Ministry of Environment launched a comprehensive investigation with international support. Now, what followed was a scene of complete chaos and speculation. Resort managers scrambled to reassure thousands of stranded tourists. Operators cancelled diving excursions indefinitely. Tourists demanded refunds or early departures. The media swarmed the town, reporting on unprecedented series of shark attacks that had now left 1 person dead and 4 seriously injured. Economically, the timing of this could not have been worse. December marked the start of the winter high season, a critical period for Egypt's tourism revenue. Within a week of the fatal attack, Sharm el-Sheikh's hotel occupancy rate dropped sharply. Some international travel agencies began diverting bookings to Hurghada, further up the coast. The Egyptian government, already under growing political and economic strain in the lead-up to the Arab Spring, faced international scrutiny. How could it be possible that such a heavily monitored tourist zone, one that prided itself on strict environmental management, became the site of a concentrated shark incident unlike anything else in recorded history? In Cairo, officials convened an emergency meeting. The Ministry of Tourism, the Ministry Environmental, and the government of South Sinai were all under pressure to explain the cause of the attacks and to ensure public safety. In the meantime, a team of shark experts arrived in Sharm el-Sheikh. Among them were specialists from the Red Sea Protectorates, Egypt's marine scientists, and a foreign consultant from the United States and from Europe. Their goal was to identify the species responsible, analyze patterns of behavior, and understand why these attacks had occurred in such a rapid succession. The early findings pointed towards the oceanic white-tip shark, a pelagic species rarely seen near the shore, but known for their boldness and persistence. The white-tip had a long record of involvement in open ocean incidents, particularly attacks on shipwreck survivors during wartime. But attacks near beaches or in coral reefs were almost unheard of. Experts reviewing video and photographic evidence taken by tourists and dive operators in the days before the attacks had noticed something alarming. An oceanic white-tip had been filmed unusually close to shore, approaching snorkelers and near feeding boats. The footage showed the shark circling slowly, unafraid of the human presence, sometimes accepting food scraps thrown into the water. Such behavior suggested that these animals had become habituated to human activity, potentially associating people, boats, or the surface movement for food. The theory gained weight as investigators interviewed boat crews and tour operations. Several admitted that feeding marine life was a common way to attract fish and, unintentionally, larger predators for paying tourists. Others pointed to unregulated waste dumping from passing vessels, including live animal transport ships moving between Egypt and Saudi Arabia. These ships sometimes dispose of dead livestock at sea, releasing blood and tissue that could draw sharks in from the coast. It was becoming clear that what had unfolded at Sharm el-Sheikh was not a random act of nature, but a convergence of human activity, environmental change, and predator behavior pushed beyond its natural limits. Still, there were some big gaps in the story. Some eyewitness accounts described 2 different species during the attacks, the oceanic white-tip and a short-fin mako, a fast-moving predator more typical of deeper waters. Whether one or both of these species were responsible has never been definitively proven. What was certain was that these events were not isolated. They were not freak events. Something had changed in the relationship between the sharks and the coastal environment, and it had happened very quickly. By mid-December, international headlines were describing Sharm el-Sheikh as a resort under siege. Authorities faced not just an ecological crisis, but a public confidence crisis. The mystery of why these sharks attacked and why here would dominate headlines for weeks. And as investigators dug deeper, they began uncovering a complex web of possible causes: environmental disruption, illegal dumping, overfishing, and human feeding practices that had blurred the boundaries between prey and predator. What began as a single tragic encounter had now become a case study of the consequences of human interference in marine ecosystems, and a warning to the global tourism industry about what happens when the natural world pushes back. Okay, guys, that is the end of our 2025 best of episode. That is the best of 2025. Gang, I just want to take a moment to say a genuine thank you to everyone who's listened this year. Whether you've been here since the very early days or you found the show somewhere in the middle of 2025 and decided for some God knows reason to stick around. The fact that so many of you choose to spend your time listening to my show about animals and history and humanity at its absolute worst and best, it still blows my mind sometimes. So to everyone who supported the show and shared episodes with friends, who's left reviews and comments and sent messages, or especially supported me on Patreon, thank you so much. This podcast only exists because of people like you, because you're still listening, and because so many of you care about these stories. Not just about how wild they are, but for what they say about our relationship with the natural world. Man Eaters has grown a lot this year, and that's entirely due to you. Your support makes it possible to keep researching, keep telling these stories, keep cracking yucks, and to do this show at the level that I think it deserves. So, new episodes will be back very, very soon. For now, guys, I'm actually in holiday in New York, so if any of you guys live in New York and want to say hi, please be normal about it, but that would be great. Thank you for an incredible year. Stay curious, stay respectful of wildlife, and as always, please, gang, stay safe, because as we've learnt, it's a jungle out there. I will see you in 2026, babies. Woohoo!